recognize that we are on the traditional territory of the Snuneymuxw First Nation. Our clerk today is Ms. Nicolina Vakar.
Yes.
I don't believe we have anyone attending electronically today. Today's GPC committee meeting will be held in accordance with the Community Charter and Council Procedure Bylaw 2018, number 7272. If during the meeting any member of the gallery has a question on a matter that is considered by the committee today, please sign up on the sheet located on the table by the double doors to my left. Please note that the Council Procedure Bylaw states that questions can only be taken on staff reports or other business items. And before we start, I'd just like to take a few moments to remind all of those attending in person about the rules of decorum. For all council and committee meetings, it's intended to be a place where democracy can freely take place in a respectful and safe manner. And it's our belief that if everyone is respectful of these basic considerations, the meeting and future meetings will be more effective in furthering the business of the City of Nanaimo. The first item on the agenda is the introduction of late items. Ms. Vakar.
Thank you, Madam Chair. There are no late items to be introduced at this time.
Thank you. Then I call for a motion for the adoption of the agenda, moved by Councillor Perino, seconded by Councillor Thorpe. All in favor? That carries. Thank you. And we have one set of minutes for adoption from our meeting on June 23rd. If I could have a motion for those. Councillor Hemmons moved, seconded by Mayor Krogh. All in favor? That carries. Thank you. Starting with agenda planning today, upcoming topics and initiatives. Ms. Vakar.
Thank you, Madam Chair. On the screen is a listing of upcoming GPC topics and initiatives for October 27th and November 24 meetings. Tentative schedule at this time. So starting with October 27th meeting, the following items are currently scheduled to come forward to the committee. Incentives that support city plan. This is arising from November 4, 2024 council motion. Nanaimo Neighborhood Zero Emission Vehicle Bylaw. Report it will be providing a review of the related policies and opportunities for discussion and consideration of council recommendation arising from July 20th of 2020. Next up, we have the Tenant Relocation Protection Project, IAP Priority Action 73, regarding creation of a policy to support tenants impacted by redevelopment and displacement. Parking review and bylaw recommendations, also an IAP priority action item. It's a follow-up report to the report scheduled for today's meeting, and it's a coordinated project between current planning and transportation teams. There will be also a presentation by a consultant. And lastly, zoning and bylaw review, IAP priority action item number 195, review of options and themes for updating the city's zoning bylaw. So having gone through those topics, just taking a look around the table if there are any comments or questions or other suggestions.
Okay, not seeing any. Seems like an action-packed meeting when we have our next GPC in October, so thank you for that. Then moving on, under reports, under Green Nanaimo, we have a report on demolition and deconstruction waste regulation to be introduced by Jeremy Holm, our Director of Planning and Development. Thank you, Mr. Holm.
Thank you, Chair, and yeah, happy to be bringing this to the committee this afternoon. So this is an item that's an integrated action plan item that was accelerated by Council for review in December 2024. Sustainability section staff have put a information package and some options together, have brought industry representatives to the committee as well. They've been generous in providing their time in this project, and we have a number of industry representatives available in attendance that are going to be coming forward to be available to present to the committee, as well as answer questions that the committee might have about this topic. It's quite an involved area and sort of an evolving area as well, and interesting to hear from different industry representatives. We thought the committee would appreciate that, and we've been lucky to have the generosity of the reps here to speak to the matter. Mr. Stewart's going to do a presentation first, briefly touch on the process that we went through and some of the findings and the options that are presented. Just wanted to touch on as well, we have links to, there's a number of communities in the province that have demolition and deconstruction bylaws. There are links in the agenda package to those bylaws. I just wanted to reference that they're quite diverse in the way they approach the issue and the scope of the bylaw, what it applies to. So there's, again, sort of a broad range of potential options there. Also just wanted to touch on the fact that, you know, if the committee were to recommend council go down this road, there's definitely some more discussion about the administrative implications of a bylaw and some of the challenges of implementing and enforcing and administering that. But we can walk through that with council or the committee as you have questions as we work through this. That's all I have to say at this point. I'm happy to turn it over to Mr. Stewart.
Thank you for the introduction, Mr. Holm, and through the chair. So I'm just going to walk you through a little bit of the research and background we learned related to the construction and demolition waste bylaws, talking about best practices, what we heard from the industry, as well as where we are in Nanaimo.
Just going to ask you to make sure that microphone's angled towards you. Thank you.
Sure, is that better, Chair? So we'll start talking about council's direction, so why we're here, talking about the GPC direction as well as some of the policies and procedures that lead us here. Then we'll get into what we heard from the preliminary discussions we've had with industry so far. As Mr. Holm noted, we have some industry representatives here, so you'll be able to hear from them directly as well. Then we'll wow you with some stats and get into demolition waste in Nanaimo and talk about some of the permits that have been issued to date. Then we'll talk about what we're referring to as the building removal hierarchy in terms of, we'll get the preference for where waste should be diverted to. We'll talk about some best practices in the other communities, and then get into some general recommendations both within a bylaw and outside of a bylaw. So just a reminder in terms of council direction, council, as Mr. Holm noted, asked us to bring forward a report speaking to deconstruction, elements of a deconstruction bylaw, as well as challenges and opportunities for regulating deconstruction in Nanaimo, and include consideration of proceeding with a bylaw, as well as presentation by industry representatives. So we hope we'll meet all three of those objectives today. In terms of the goals, so the RDN's here to speak to some of their goals as well, but we do note that the regional district has a goal to reduce waste from the landfill by 90% by 2030. Our own integrated action plan speaks to a number of waste management goals, but specifically talks about implementing a construction, recycling, and deconstruction demolition bylaw, as well as some general city plan policies to support waste diversion, encourage the adaptive reuse of buildings to reduce construction waste, and of course support circular economy. So back in the spring, we met with a number of industry representatives to talk about some of the issues related to deconstruction and waste management. We followed that up with some one-on-one meetings as well. Not shown on the slide, we also met with Lighthouse, both on one-on-one and during this May 1st stakeholder meeting. During that time, we heard some challenges related to deconstruction bylaws, and one of those related to the building code, so that related to primarily the use of wood from existing buildings and reusing that wood. As well as I've stood here before this council a number of times talking about energy efficiency, so somewhat ironically, we also heard about the challenges of course, reusing old components and meeting the energy efficiency requirements, but within both the building bylaw and the BC Building Code. We also heard a lot of comments about space and time. So related to sorting materials on site and the time that it takes, as well as some constraints, physical constraints on site, and the need for areas to sort off site. Time also talked about, as we hear from the development industry time and time again, time is money, and we heard about the delays caused by sorting and deconstruction as an issue, and we'll get into that a little bit more in a bit, and I know some of the other speakers will speak to that as well. We heard concerns about safety related to nails or lead in board, as well as fire hazards with waste left on site, especially this time of year where things are drier, potential of arson or in other in accidental fires. We also heard some solutions and recommendations. Primarily, the industry looked at focusing on education before regulation, and within that, a phased approach with predictable times to allow industry time to adjust. They also talked about focusing on incentives for salvage and reuse over regulation, again, providing space for storing and sorting materials off-site, and then looking at reframing this as an economic opportunity. In other words, embracing the circular economy, and this was more of just a general comment of reframing the discussion around those circular economy, economic development principles. So in terms of where we're at in Nanaimo, you're going to hear from the RDN a little bit more on this, but we have 58% of materials being landfilled are ready to be recycled, reused, and composted. So that's just a general comment related to all waste in Nanaimo. When we talk about construction and demolition waste, the RDN estimates about 95% of that waste can be kept out of the land for material recovery practices and targets. So in other words, there is that small amount of waste that, no matter what, you can't do things like, asbestos or other hazardous materials, but for the most part, it is possible to divert most of this waste. 7% of all commercial waste is from building materials, and as you can note there, reducing building materials would have a significant impact on GHG reduction as well as reducing the amount of waste hauled to our landfill. Just a few more stats. Typical deconstruction, 70% of materials can be recycled and 25% can be reused. This middle stat I thought was really interesting, again, being on the environmental side of things, that 30% of old growth lumber is used in deconstruction waste, so there's some quality lumber in there, and obviously reusing that would divert the need for additional deforestation. We'll talk a lot about home relocation throughout this. So of the 700 homes in BC demolished each year, only about 100 are relocated, and you'll hear from Nickel Brothers a bit more on this topic, I'm sure. So in terms of what we're doing now, again, you're going to hear from the RDN, so I'm not going to spend a lot of time on this because most of this is their work, but they have developed a best practice guide. They do have tipping fees, a number of disposal bans, waste hauler licensing requirements, as well as both the RDN and the city are funding Lighthouse, so you'll hear from later as well, related to their building material exchange program. In terms of demolitions in Nanaimo, what we did is we looked back about 4.5 years, so from the beginning of 2020 to I think it was June when we started looking at this, and we had 168 demolition permits since that time, predominantly single-family dwellings, so 82% of those. In terms of growth, like you can see on the chart there, and I apologize, it's kind of backwards with the more recent dates being on the left-hand side of the chart, but you can see it's been pretty steady. Like it hasn't really increased that much or decreased. We also looked at, for the more recent, the age of the homes. And now why that matters is obviously older, if homes are a little harder to relocate, a little less value in them, but have some pretty quality materials in terms of deconstruction in them. So for the most part, you can see there on the chart that a good chunk of the homes were, almost all of them were pre-1975, and for many of them were pre-1960 as well. As I'm sure a lot of members of council know, BC Assessment also looks at the conditions of homes when they're assessing. So this was just within the last year. We looked at the condition of homes that were demolished. This was obviously a bit challenging because the BC Assessment, as a new home comes on, they're going to update those conditions to reflect the new home. So this would be the condition of the home that was demolished, obviously. You'll see that only one of those homes was considered substandard, the rest being considered standard or fair by BC Assessment. For the most part, homes are removed for purposes of redevelopment, with only 18% of the homes we looked at being removed for another reason other than redevelopment. In a lot of cases, that one in case it was illegal construction or removal by the city for the purposes of a city works project. But for the most part, as we saw, redevelopment is the key reason. And within that redevelopment, it's primarily multifamily residential. We expect that to increase even more with the BC housing legislation that got implemented. That being said, it's too early to tell. We haven't seen a substantial increase in demolitions yet to date. Before we get into recommendations and best practices, I do want to kind of pause here because I've used a couple terms. I just want to make sure we're all on the same page in terms of these terms. So when we talk about reuse or deconstruct, we're talking about salvaging building materials from the house. So that would essentially be taking the house apart in almost the reverse order it was constructed in and salvaging any materials that are still able to be reused. So primarily the wood, but it could include things like fixtures as well. Whereas recycling, and you'll hear the term recycling a lot in various contexts within this, but in terms of what we're talking about, recycling means actually disposing of those building materials in a form different than what they were originally intended to be used as. I'm just catching up on my own notes here. So yeah, generally those are sorted, cleaned, and treated and reused, like I said, for another purpose. Oops. So I mentioned when I talked about the agenda for today, we wanted to talk about the building removal hierarchy. So what that is essentially a hierarchy of different ways we can deal with a building that needs to be removed from the site, in terms of the most sustainable being at the top and working our way down to the least sustainable. So in terms of the most sustainable is obviously keeping the building wherever possible. We realize there's some challenges with that in terms of increasing density and some of the provincial housing targets that you'll hear from and have heard from many times before. But certainly, if possible, and we do support this in city plan, adaptive reuse of existing buildings, and wherever we can support that, whether it's through variances, lot size changes, or a change of use, that's something being considered. Next is relocate, and again, you'll hear from Nickel Brothers later on today, but that's simply moving the building in its existing form to another site. So they'll look at that and essentially, again, very little impact there because all those building materials will be reused and the building will be reused essentially as it was originally intended, just happened to be in a different location with potentially, well, obviously different foundation and things like that. Next is that reuse, and so that's the deconstruction and salvage we talked about earlier, where you're taking apart that building and reusing the boards and other materials. Then is recycle, where you're actually sorting the materials on site and recycling them. And we separated here recycle and energy recovery, which you won't, and because we felt that energy recovery had a little bit of a less benefit, and that's simply where you're grinding down wood for things like hog fuel for purposes of a district energy system. So we'll shift over to talk about what everyone else is doing here. So we looked at 10 local governments in BC. 8 of those have demolition or deconstruction waste management bylaws. As Mr. Holm noted, the approach varies pretty widely between them, but there are a few commonalities that we'll talk about. The other 2, I should note, relied on best practice guidelines with the RDN's existing best practice guidelines we referenced before, and I believe it was the District of North Vancouver, I could have that wrong, between the city, one of those 2. Relies on a checklist. It's the city of North Vancouver. So of those we looked at, every single one that has a bylaw requires some sort of damage deposit. And where they vary is how that deposit is released, with some focusing more on a salvage requirement related to wood, with others focusing on more of a recycling requirement based on the diversion rate. All of them require some sort of compliance report. So that's post-compliance reporting that would come into the municipality stating what was done. For the most part, I think 7 of those also require a pre-checklist saying what they're going to do as well. So a waste disposal pre-plan. And I note there that says 8. That's because the city of North Vancouver also requires one, even though they don't have a bylaw. As I mentioned, so some of those focus on reuse and deconstruction. That's the City of Victoria and the District of North Van. Others focus on recycling, and others require both reuse and recycling requirements. So council asked us to look at some typical elements you'd see in a demolition or deconstruction bylaw. So what we found is some best practices as well. When we started talking to some industry experts looking around within BC and outside BC, we kind of found these 6 key elements that we think should be at least considered if we go down the path of requiring a bylaw. The first is a relocation assessment. So that's following on the hierarchy of obviously relocate, where prior to issuing a demo permit, the building needs to be assessed. Would we require assessment by a professional to see if it could be relocated to a different site. As you'll hear from others, not all the time, some buildings can't be relocated due to their condition of the building itself or various other reasons, but for the most part, we can look at whether that building could be relocated or not. Then we could look at a wood salvage requirement, so then it's focusing on the reuse section of the hierarchy, where you'd have a typical, like for example, Victoria uses a board size or kilometers, so that they would be required to salvage a certain amount of wood from that building. Or we could also look at a diversion rate requirement, which is focusing more on the recycling, so a certain percentage of the materials need to be diverted from the landfill. We'd also want to look at requiring a waste management plan and a salvage materials assessment. So that's, like I said, more of a pre-requirement where we state what's in the building itself. So looking at the materials in the building and how those materials will be dealt with through the deconstruction or demolition of that building. Refundable deposits have proven effective when we talk to other municipalities that require them. And that's probably why everyone who has a bylaw requires it. So we look at potentially a refundable deposit, as well as a post-compliance report. And the compliance report and refundable deposit tend to go together for obvious reasons. In order to have your deposit issued or refunded, you need to issue it or submit a compliance report. We went a little further than beyond the bylaw and maybe beyond the scope that we originally intended. And that's based on the conversation we had with the industry primarily, where we heard a lot of, does it have to be a bylaw? Are there other ways to achieve this? And there certainly are some other ways we can reduce deconstruction waste beyond the bylaw. One of those, and something I think we're already doing, but we could certainly formalize, is flagging building relocation and reuse early in the development permit process. So Nanaimo is unique in a lot of ways in that we separate our deconstruction permits from our building permits. Not every community does that, and what that does allow us to do is developer, if they need to remove a building, they don't need to necessarily get their building permit issued. They can have a demolition permit issued before the building permit, which could save up time. And so in order for that to do that, we often know at the pre-development stages, whether that's the demolition permit or subdivision, that the building needs to go. And at that point, we could start having those conversations about relocating, or maybe we can look at ways to keep the building, or deconstruction. So time is something, again, we heard from industry. This is a good way to recognize the time impacts and flag that early for the industry. So that's something that certainly our current planning and subdivision staff are starting to do, but we could formalize even more. As well as we could take potentially a leadership method here. So I believe 3 of the permits we looked at in the last year were City of Nanaimo issued permits. So looking at prioritizing relocation and deconstruction when the city needs to remove a building. We recognize that's a challenge. Often, I think the report notes, often when the city removes a building, that building's far beyond the end of its life. So there may not be any value left to that building, but certainly looking at an assessment is something, and this is based on a policy the City of Portland has, where whenever the City of Portland removes a building, they're required to assess it for relocation. We can look at supporting buildings on the property through variance, as I mentioned earlier, and that's based on the keep or remove. What I haven't noted, but noted in the report, is within our building bylaw, we have a policy that requires where a building is relocated into Nanaimo, that the value of that building matches the existing buildings within 50 meters of the building. So not a very long radius, but what it does is it makes it challenging to relocate, say, an older building into a newer neighborhood. The rationale for that policy, we believe, is based on aesthetics and neighborhood impact, but it certainly conflicts in some ways with some of our other policies related to equity and supporting buildings and reducing waste. So this is something was flagged to us by the industry as well as potentially a barrier to relocation in Nanaimo. So that's all I have. You will have an opportunity to hear from industry unless there's any questions from myself or Mr. Holmes.
Thank you for the presentation. I'm not seeing any questions at this point, so Mr. Holm?
Thank you, Chair. Sorry, I forgot to mention earlier that Ms. Bakar has received a package from Nickel Brothers to be circulated to the committee shortly if it hasn't been already. And it's just some draft, it looks like some information and some draft documents that Nickel Brothers has suggested for committee's consideration. They appear to be on City of Nanaimo letterhead, but they're actually drafted by Nickel Brothers. So you will receive that package shortly. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Thorpe?
Thank you, Chair, if I may.
Oh, pardon me.
Good, thanks very much. Through you, Chair, if I may, before we go any further, thank you, Mr. Stewart. I've read the report, and I just wondered if you could clarify for me or expand a little bit at this point on the options to developing a bylaw. And perhaps this is premature because we have yet to hear from delegations, but you do point out that a bylaw process would be reasonably expensive in terms of staff time and might be open to other routes or avenues that might achieve close to the same thing. Could you just elaborate on those? Because I didn't see them really fully scoped out in the report.
Absolutely, I can start through the chair. In terms of the staff time that Councillor Thorpe raised, we did talk to staff in other municipalities that do have bylaws, and that's where that estimate of half an FTE to 1.5 FTE came from. So for example, the City of Victoria has a waste management staff person who manages their deconstruction and waste management bylaw, and she mentioned she spends about half of her time related to that. A lot of that is compliance reports. What she does is once they submit their compliance report, they're asked to say where the wood that came out of the building is going to, and she'll spend that time phoning the individuals that receive that wood to confirm receipt of the wood and get an idea of what it's going to be used for. So I get a lot of interesting stats that are that, but that takes a lot of staff time. She estimates, again, about half of her time is related to managing that bylaw. She has an admin staff as well who spends about half of their time related to managing that bylaw, which is where we get the 1 FTE. That varied based on other municipalities we spoke to, which is how you get that. In terms of the effectiveness of a bylaw, however, we do see has been quite effective. Again, Victoria mentioned that they actually tend to get more wood being deconstructed and removed than the minimum requirement. Almost everyone tends to get the full refund back. So, and prior to the bylaw, they really got nothing. So they did look at their stats before and after, and it's been dramatic in terms of impact. But yeah, the staff time is a lift. I believe I answered the question, but if there's anything outstanding, please let me know. And Mr.
Sure, thank you. Maybe I'll just add to that. So the report, through to Councillor Thorpe's question, so the report does identify a number of key elements that we found to be consistent between bylaws, areas that they're looking to address. So I think Mr. Stewart covered that in the presentation. Happy to go over those again. So there's some key common elements, I guess, amongst bylaws. But as far as options to develop a bylaw, if the committee were to decide to recommend that council proceed with that, and then if we were to get direction from council to proceed with development of a bylaw, then we would bring back draft bylaw with specific, as I mentioned, there's a range of scope, I guess, that communities have chosen as far as what those, in the case of, say, Victoria, for example, the demolition deconstruction bylaw requirements apply to only single-family dwellings. I believe it's before 1960, so they're earlier than 1960, only for single-family residential demolition, whereas Squamish, for example, is a much broader scope. It would apply to any demolition activity. So we can bring back, so what we've done in this report is organize an opportunity to discuss the issues and benefits potentially of a bylaw with industry, identified sort of the common key elements that we found amongst bylaws, and then there'd be a further discussion if we got direction to look at I guess the scope of a bylaw and what that would mean. We've tried to identify some of the, as Mr. Stewart spoke to, the the work that would be required to do that, to undertake the development of the bylaw, and then also to administer it. But there'd be more detail to come subsequently if that helps. Thanks.
All right, thank you very much. I appreciate that. I guess what I was looking for was a description of options if council should choose not to proceed with the bylaw route, bearing in mind that sometimes the carrot is more effective than the stick. But I'll wait until we hear from delegations and have more debate on this. Thank you.
Great,
Thank you. Councillor Gesselbrecht?
Thanks, through you to staff. Yeah, just on the scoping, I guess I'm understanding that if we did want to proceed, the scoping question would come back to us later on just sort of exactly what elements we'd want. Just in terms of the staff time allocation, I was just curious, like, my understanding there's sort of different elements and ways to go about dealing with the houses in like a hierarchy. There's basically like first check to see if you can relocate it. And then you can, at the base level, it's like, how much of this can we recycle by just, getting the concrete, wood, and shingles and sort of separate. And then there's this next step of like the actual salvaging, which is sort of not as established the routine around it and pulling out the wood and then getting it into the market. And from my discussion in Victoria, that's where a lot of staff time was because they didn't have the end market established, and they're working on a solution right now to make it a lot more efficient, which maybe was putting the cart before the horse and how they went about and did it. But my question is, in terms of the scoping for just the, if we just set like a minimum requirement for recycling, would that reduce the amount of staff time needed in terms of administration? If we're just like, we want to set a minimum bar that you need to recycle X amount from the house, separated into concrete, wood, kind of like what was happening at the Howard Johnson or the Tally Ho, whatever you want to call it.
Yeah, that's a bit of a challenging question to answer at this point, but maybe I'll just, in response, just say that I mean, industry currently is taking care of a lot of if there's a market for the material, if there's a cost to disposing of it, industry is working on that. And as you mentioned, as Councillor Gesselbrecht mentioned, you'll see that in larger demolitions. It's very apparent in that case. If you watch smaller demolition, single-family dwellings underway, you see often sort of different phases of demolition. If they have to go in and do a hazmat, remove the hazardous materials, and then you'll see, other materials kind of come out in layers as they demolish a house. So the industry already is obviously taking care of, if there's a cost to getting rid of material, they're looking at lower cost options to reusing it or recycling it. As far as the staff time to administer it, it is going to depend what we come up with. I don't think it's going to. I don't think it's really going to matter whether it's you're asking for 20% of material to be reused or 60%. I think there's a reality check there as far as what is actually reusable, what can industry manage, what types of materials are coming out of these buildings, and as Councillor Gesselbrecht mentioned, sort of a larger discussion around and you've spoken with Victoria about this, about is there a market for it? It's part of the discussion. Is there an opportunity to grow a market for the material? Are there other options for reuse? But as far as what level of material being recycled or tied in a bylaw to a requirement to reuse or recycle, I think it's more of a sensitivity and trying to hit, if council were to direct us to develop a bylaw, to hit a mark that reflects the actual opportunity to do that, the reality of that. Of the ability to recycle that material rather than the administrative burden. I think the administrative burden is both, and we speak to it from the city perspective, but there's obviously an administrative burden to industry as well in putting the deposits down, generating the reports, assessing the building's potential for relocation, evaluating how much material from a building can be reused. So there's layers to it, so difficult to say at this time that that a certain number of reuse requirement would have any bearing on the administrative burden. Thanks.
Councillor Hemmons?
Thank you, Chair. A very simple question that I believe was just answered, but just for my own clarity, before we go into the detailed presentations, 2 examples. So currently I'm watching the deconstruction of the Howard Johnson, and they're pulling out big chunks of wood and putting them aside, and I'm assuming they'll go somewhere. They'll either be reused or sold. In comparison, when the old Harewood School went down, I remember this sense that they were just bulldozing it, and it was going into the landfill. So is it industry's decision of whether they want to salvage, and is it based upon what you were just saying, that it's about the cost of pulling it out, is there an end market, et cetera? Just from my own basic understanding, is that accurate, that currently it's the developer, the builder, who has full discrete kind of control over that?
Yeah, I'll start and then Mr. Stewart can jump in, but yes, effectively, it's dictated by the market and other regulations in place. You'll hear from the Regional District of Nanaimo as well, but I mean, there are regulations that are directed at the waste stream as well, but yes, it'll be the developer's decision at this point what market there is for the material and what the cost there is to dispose of it, the labor involved in working through separating it, and some of the other concerns that Mr. Stewart touched on earlier.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you. So at this point, I'll invite our presenters to join the Horseshoe in person, along with David Stewart, our environmental planner. Thank you for being here. We also have Cassidy Vander Ross, marketing manager with Nickel Brothers. Joining us via Zoom is Gil Yaron, the managing director of circular innovation with Lighthouse. In person, we also have Darren Moss, director and project manager with Tectonica and Nanaimo Development Group. We also have Ben Routledge, manager of solid waste services with the Regional District of Nanaimo, and Sonam Bajwa, solid waste planner with the RDN as well. And also on Zoom, we have Bevan Hodgins from BROD Demolition. So thank you all for being here today to provide expert input. And Ms. Ricard?
Thank you, Madam Chair. At this time, Bevan Hodgins does not appear to be on Zoom. We will certainly make sure that they're on the screen when they show the meeting. Thank you.
And for the presentations, is there a time limit for each presentation?
Thank you, Madam Chair. All of the presenters have been directed to limit their presentation to 5 minutes.
Excellent, thank you. And unlimited questions, so thank you. So we'll, Mr. Stewart, are you kicking this off, or are we going to Cassidy Vander Ross?
I had my say. I will go straight to Cassidy.
Okay, thank you.
Hi, I'm Cassidy Vander Ross. I'm the communications manager with Nickel Brothers. I am also on the Federal Housing Supply Committee and the Federal Task Group for Relocated Homes. I am on the board of Zero Waste BC and Recycle BC, and I'm also a member of Metro Vancouver's Technical Advisory Committee. For Nickel Bros, we move houses. We have been operating in BC since 1956, I believe, and everything that we're reviewing here, you can see the BC SMA logo there, has been reviewed by all members of the BC Structural Movers Association and approved by them. So in 2020, I was able to look up 45 demolition applications in the city of Nanaimo. If all 45 of those homes were demolished, that would have resulted in 3,600,000 kilograms of embodied carbon released into our atmosphere, 4,500,000 kilograms of demolition waste to the Heartland landfill, and 7,290 trees cut down for lumber and sent to landfill. When we think of climate action, we tend to hear a lot about operational carbon, which is the carbon that we create by living in our homes, by driving our cars, etc. And embodied carbon, especially within housing regulations, tends to get left out. So embodied carbon is all of the carbon that we create through manufacturing, through importing and exporting, and it's kind of held in those materials. So the embodied carbon of a home, generally, like right now on average, the average home has a carbon payback period of 168 years for them to pay back the carbon that is created through building that house. And our average time for demolishing a house is 72 years. So right now, we are not even getting to that halfway point for most homes in BC. And that is partially why we are seeing this. So Canada agreed to reduce carbon dioxide emissions to 524 megatons per year by 2030. And we have seen our emissions continue to rise. And part of that, I believe, is the rate of demolition that we have and the fact that we are not paying attention to embodied carbon. And you can see that in industries other than housing too. Everyone is kind of like, why do we keep ignoring embodied carbon? But we're here to talk about housing, so we'll focus on that part. On the bright side, we are starting to see some action regarding home relocation and embodied carbon regulation. The Ministry of Housing has put out a technical bulletin, which is provided in your handouts. That was put out in 2024. The National Resource Council has started the Housing Supply Committee, which includes relocated homes, and they've started a task group specific to relocated homes. We've seen the deconstruction bylaw in City of Victoria, which I'm sure you are all either familiar with or will get familiar with through that staff report. The Capital Regional District recently sponsored a home demolition waste event, which primarily focused on home relocation. And Metro Vancouver is now listing home relocation as a critical metric in measuring success of their new zero waste plan. What we are suggesting as part of the recommendations to City of Nanaimo is to implement a building reuse assessment form with all demolition applications, include a large refundable demolition deposit like we see in City of Victoria. City of Victoria's is $19,500. The implementation of early green removal permits. So these ones I'm gonna explain a little bit. The early green removal permit, so one of the main things that prevents home relocation companies and deconstruction companies from competing on an even playing field with demolition is that demolition is fast. You can have a house demolished within 24 hours, whereas both relocation and home relocation can take, a few weeks. So the early green removal permit would allow deconstruction or relocation to begin prior to demolition permit approval, provided that all of the application requirements have been submitted, which just allows that timeline to be more even for both. We'd also like a municipal building removal procurement standards policy, which is just a fancy way of saying if there's a city-owned building that needs to be demolished, can we please relocate it or deconstruct it instead of demolishing it? And then number 5 would be storage space. We do see sometimes deconstruction companies getting space for materials. For instance, in City of Vancouver, there was space dedicated to deconstruction materials, but no space was allocated for home relocation. And we'd like to see for both, ideally, that would be great. And then in terms of supporting building alternatives, because when we're talking about those end markets, it's important to be supporting, where homes are going as well as where they're coming from. So we'd like to see the omission of the value rule in the bylaws. And we also have a temporary accelerated relocation permit, which is included in the package. And that allows homes to be relocated prior to the approval of the building permit, as long as all requirements have been submitted again. And the reason for that is because sometimes if a developer here is ready to demolish the home, but the buyer here isn't ready to receive it, the home will get demolished despite the fact that we could have moved it a week later in some cases, or even a couple days later in some cases. So it just allows us to get a bit of a head start on that time frame. All of those permitting forms have been included in the package that I provided to you. And the reason we did that is we've found sometimes building departments especially can get a little bit overwhelmed when you start throwing changes at them, and they kind of get overwhelmed by how they're supposed to structure that. So we've found the easiest way to present that is to take the current building applications and demolition applications, insert our recommendations into them and kind of what we see as the ideal, And it seems to make it a lot easier for them to go through and kind of revise and see how that flow would work. So that's kind of what you're seeing in front of you. There's also that provincial bulletin, because everybody likes to know that they're doing things in line with provincial recommendations. And then finally, we have the Home Demolition Waste Prevention Municipal Action Plan, which was developed between Nickel Bros Renewal Development, which is a company on the mainland, and Lighthouse Sustainability Society, who you'll be hearing from later today. And that is it for me. Thank you very much for the opportunity to speak with you today.
Thank you very much. Councilor Perino.
Thank you, Chair. If I could ask some questions through you. I've watched two homes. That one that is, it's got a sign up saying, you know, we'll relocate, or house for sale, we'll relocate. And one that was moved last year, very close to where I happen to live. I was shocked by how much work it took to move a home. You know, to put beams in and the lifting and the, you know, wires being lifted and things like that. How far can you actually move a home?
So in BC, there's a bylaw that you can only move a home 100 kilometers by land.
Okay.
We're actually working with the ministry right now to have that altered to time rather than kilometers, because some homes you can move distances faster. By water, you can pretty much move them
That's a different
anywhere,
story.
as long as you have water access. It's pretty much unlimited. But yeah, on land, we're restricted to 100 kilometers.
Okay. And also what surprised me was the homes, the two homes, one has not sold, it's been over a year. The other one took at least a year to sell. So why aren't people buying these older homes to relocate them? In your opinion, sorry.
Sure. I would have to know kind of which homes you're talking about to totally be able to answer that.
Okay.
I would say generally we have a lot of we generally have more buyers than we have supply. Yeah. So I'd have to know kind of which homes they are. Sometimes it can be, you know, if the home is taller, it can be finding a spot where there aren't as many lines, so it's not going to cost the receiving person as much.
Yes.
Other times it might be that it needs a waterfront location to go to, and the buyers we've had interested don't have waterfront.
Okay.
Other times it might just be that, you know, maybe the home doesn't have good curb appeal or something like that.
Okay.
I would say logistics definitely play a part.
Okay.
But that's kind of where that early notification is really important, because if we get notified earlier in the process, we can start marketing earlier. Whereas most of the time, we get notified when the demolition permit is already approved.
Okay.
And at that point, we're now behind in marketing the building, if
Okay.
that makes sense.
Okay, and a final question. What does it cost to actually move a home?
So average is $120 a square foot.
$120 per square foot, not by distance?
No, so we average it by square foot. In reality, when we quote, so we never charge for the building. The building is always $1.
$1,
And then it's just the move that people pay for.
That's right.
So obviously, distance, utilities, barging, all of that plays a part.
Oh, so that's extra. That's,
So barging and utilities are extra from the listing price.
okay.
Yeah. Usually for barging, we'll try to combine, so we'll try to get like 2 to 3 homes on a barge so everyone can split the cost.
Yes.
And then utilities, it just depends on the house and where it is. Like some homes don't have any utilities,
Okay.
others have a lot. But when you average it out, it comes to about $120 a square foot.
Okay.
Whereas building right now is $500 to $800 a square foot.
Thank you.
Thank you. So not seeing any other questions, I'm going to go to Gil Yaron, the Managing Director of Circular Innovation with Lighthouse, joining us by Zoom. Welcome.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and committee members. Thank you for this opportunity to present to you today. I believe there's a slide deck, but I can't see it, so just wait for that
Yep.
to come up.
We've got it up now.
You may recall I had the opportunity to present to Council earlier this year on the Building Material Exchange Program, and I will have some exciting news to share with you at the end of this presentation, but I'm going to focus on the bylaw, and apologies for any repetition in what I share with you, but there is some commonality in the recommendations that I'm going to make. So next slide, please. So our mission at Lighthouse is to advance regenerative and circular practices in the built environment that nurture ecological and human health. We focus on all aspects of circularity in the built environment. And I'll turn to the next slide. So when we think about that, there are what we see as 5 different areas, from designing homes for deconstruction, constructing the buildings, occupying them, and possibly modifying during the life of their the life of the building, and then removal and end markets. Next slide, please. This presentation is focused on only one of those elements, which is the removal of the buildings. But it's important to keep in mind this bylaw in the larger context of a circular economic environment. Next slide. So you've heard a bunch of stats today. My calculation based on the permits that we were that were publicly available to us is that there were 239 single-family homes demolished in Nanaimo in the past decade. Next slide, please. That equated to about 239,000 metric tons of materials, not all of which has gone to landfill, but the vast majority of which has. About 15,500 metric tons of CO2 equivalent emissions, and something that we don't pay enough attention to, an unquantified amount of lost revenue, economic activity, because of those materials that could have been recirculated in the local economy. Next slide. I really appreciated the data that Mr. Stewart provided to the committee, and I hope this will just shed a little more light on things. If we look at the last 10 years, the blue line represents the number of building permits that have been issued in the city. You can see there's a marked decrease in the last number of years. The bottom green line is the number of demolitions. Again, this is based on permit data that was available to me. That line is actually a modest upward trajectory, but given the scale of the y-axis on the left side, it looks like it's flat. It's not actually flat, it's actually increasing slightly. But what's really interesting is the red line, which is the demolition rate, which is the relative number of demolitions relative to the number of building permits. So while we see a decrease in building permits issued, we see a relatively larger majority of demolitions occurring. And this is consistent with a growing urban environment where you're seeing more sites that are being developed having to remove existing structures. And so because of that factor, densification, anticipated population growth in the city, the relaxation of provincial zoning, and also this new federal housing mandate, you're going to see that red line increases markedly over the next decade. We're going to see a relatively larger, no matter how many building permits are issued, the relative number of demolitions are going to increase markedly. Okay. Next slide, please. So when we look at the impact of that, we see diminishing landfill capacity in the region, and we have a very finite amount of landfill space. We see an increasing climate imperative dealing with the impacts of climate change and the impacts that the built environment has on climate. A dependency on precarious markets in our the current environment with tariffs and the uncertainties around cross-border trade. Putting demands on materials and increasing costs on materials. And then, so that's tied into the next point. So all of these factors are, driving us to really need to refocus our attention on conserving, preserving, elevating the value of the resources that we already have in our communities, which are locked in large part in our existing homes. Next slide, please. One of the major barriers that's often cited to demolition, or deconstruction, I should say, is that it costs more than demolition. And we are in the midst of doing a larger study on this, but this is just one piece of data that we have from Vima Deconstruction, which is a leading deconstruction company in the Lower Mainland. They basically went out to market, and they took an existing home that was scheduled for demolition, and they got quotes from demolition companies. And you can see the range of quotes on the exact same property was between $32,500 and $66,500, quite a spread. And the cost for deconstruction landed right in the middle at around $42,000. And that's because, to a large extent, some of the cost associated with deconstruction can be offset by the preservation and the value in the materials that are harvested or salvaged from decon. Next slide, please. The other thing that I wanted to touch on, Mr. Stewart mentioned it, and we are going to be exploring this in more detail, is this notion that deconstruction delays the construction process. And this is, aside from cost, this is the #2 reason that's cited or barrier for deconstruction. But what we've observed anecdotally is that when you see a site being cleared or being demolished, construction does not happen the next day. That land will generally lay fallow for an extended period of time, months, in some cases years, before it's developed. And so while deconstruction itself may take longer than demolition, that is not itself the reason for any potential delays in construction. And we are in the process, as I said, of reviewing permitting data to provide some more substantive evidence to back up this observation, which we see regularly. I mean, it's not, you can just pick a couple of sites and watch as structures come down and wait to see how long it takes for new construction to start. Next slide, please. So Lighthouse is developing a roadmap for municipalities to follow in terms of building out a deconstruction strategy or a circular economic strategy for the built environment. And you've heard a number of the recommendations have already been presented by Cassidy and Mr. Stewart. We echo those. I'll emphasize the ones that we think are important. There's a few more I've added here that are unique. But the triage model, which is essentially the hierarchy that Mr. Stewart presented, homes, we need to prioritize infill, followed by relocating homes, deconstruction, partial deconstruction, and then demolition should be a last resort. And mandatory assessments should precede any activity in order to assess the viability of preserving the home for its highest and best use. This is something that, having observed the implementation and operation of existing deconstruction bylaws across the Lower Mainland in the United States, this is something that's missing from current policy. You've heard mention of the significant refundable deposit. We definitely see that as a necessary component to any policy. One thing that wasn't mentioned is that we would really encourage council to apply this to all building typologies. If you have a mandatory assessment framework in place, those buildings that do not merit relocation or deconstruction will get demolished anyway. But extending it across all building types, like the City of Burnaby did, ensures that we capture all the value that's coming out of these existing homes. And then finally, making sure that there's strong and clear definitions of key terms like deconstruction, salvage, and reuse, so that terms don't get diluted and we don't see deconstruction bylaws being an excuse to demolish and use homes for landfill cover, which is what's happening in some jurisdictions. Next slide, please. Okay, if I have one more minute, or how much time do I have left? I'll just use it to...
So you're actually about 5 minutes over at this point, but...
Oh, I'll stop. Sorry.
Okay. In case we have any questions from council at this point. I have a question about who does those assessments that you were speaking of.
Right. So there's two options. You could have city staff doing it similar like to a building inspector, or you could have a third party like you do with energy assessments, right? Someone that goes in and does an energy audit of a home. Is that?
So either staff or a third party
That's
that
right.
the city would hire to do that work.
Not the city. The city. I mean, it could. They could just be authorized individuals or companies that could do the work.
Mr. Holm?
Sorry about that. Yeah, thank you. Just to add to that, yeah, I think it would be a third party hired by the applicant for the demolition permit, and I'd probably just an additional. I think this is an area where there's not certification or regulation around who that is at this point or what their qualifications are, but I'm sure there would be representatives from industry that could probably comment on that as well. Thanks.
Thank you. Councillor Gesselbrecht.
Thanks. I was speaking with one of the companies that does deconstruction down in Victoria, and I believe they're involved with some of the assessments. But aside from sort of the recycling of buildings, which is a bit different, the salvaging end has been really focused on the wood salvaging. And the City of Victoria mandated a certain percentage of wood being salvaged. And in the initial period, it was difficult because a demolition company or deconstruction company or the developer would have to find where to bring that wood. And that caused, staff at the city had to phone around and figure out if the wood actually made it to where it was, and it was just a bit of a hassle. Now what they're doing, I think at the Heartland landfill, there's like a location that's being developed, and a nonprofit basically runs the location, and the salvage wood just basically all gets sent to that location and stored. They sign off that they've received it. Staff only have to check at one spot, and that's how the salvaging is done, and then they can market it from there and take on that hassle themselves. I'm curious, does Lighthouse do that type of work? Like, are you folks involved in that location, or do you know of who's running that in Victoria? And is that something that is good to set up? If you're looking at setting up a salvaging system, is having like a location yard run by a nonprofit.
Yeah, so I'm not aware of that aspect of the Heartland landfill's operations. I was aware of the general contract with a private entity that's managing all the clean wood that comes in there. But if there's some additional step that's happening where any wood that's salvaged under the bylaws is quantified or tracked and reported out, I'm actually not aware of that. So
it might be two different locations, or there might be the separate thing at Heartland and another location that's in development right now. But I'm just curious if you're aware of that to provide more details. But I can follow up at a later date. Thank you.
But we are looking at something very much like that in Metro Vancouver. That is, a place where materials can be quantified and there can be compliance reporting provided. It's not necessary that it happen that way. I mean, I think the compliance reporting can be done by anybody with photo verification and things like that. It's proven to be pretty successful.
Thank you.
This might be oh, sorry. Okay.
Mayor Krog.
Thank you very much, Chair, and this question happily answered by anyone. One of the considerations I have in all of this is what is it going to cost? Because obviously, whether it's deconstruction, demolition, etc., it's going to cost the owner, developer, whoever it is, something. So just to do an assessment of whether the building actually has recyclable, valuable material or doesn't, what's going to definitely end up in waste, landfill, whatever. Any idea, are there companies that do that? If so, what do they charge? What's the range of costs? If you can comment on that one way or the other, I'd be very pleased. Thank you.
I'll go to Mr. Yaron and then Vander Ross.
Yeah, so far what we've seen is that the industry itself will offer that as a complimentary service. So deconstruction companies, home moving companies like Nickel Brothers, I don't want to speak for Cassidy, but generally, that's part of their business operations and business development is to go out and assess homes, because that's a potential job for them, right? And they're going to be, it's in their interest to identify those homes where there is salvage potential, and if it's not valuable, if it doesn't make sense for them economically to do it, it's in their interest to say that. So it's not like they're going to be gouging owners for work that, hope that answers your question.
Yeah, I'll echo what Gil said. Generally, we have to assess a home regardless of whether or not it's a city requirement if we're going to relocate it. Having the assessment as a requirement does allow us to at least know which homes are relocatable earlier in the process, but it's not something that we would charge for. It's kind of like, when a contractor offers you a free estimate, it's kind of the same thing. The only thing that would change for us would be adding a signature to whether the home is relocatable or not. What was your other question? I can't remember the other part, sorry.
Not really a third question, but just a sort of a rambling request for your comments about this. In other words, if it's, how does one assess? I mean, there's an assessment to determine whether it's relocatable. There's an assessment then, if it's not relocatable, as to what can be salvaged from it, is the language I would use, old-fashioned language, or reused. And then what is inevitably going to end up in landfill? And there is no, what I understand is there's no particular industry, business, et cetera, at the present time that charges for that. It'll be something like Lighthouse or yourselves will, in the process of providing an estimate, if you will, would provide that service for free.
Yeah, that's at least how we've discussed it with Mr. Stewart, is that they would call us, or they would call us in a deconstruction company. We would come out, assess, let them know if it is relocatable or deconstructible, or if it's not. We would sign that portion of the permit, and then they would kind of choose to move forward how they want to move forward.
Okay. Thank you. And I just see, Mr. Rutledge, you'd like to weigh in on this?
Just to put in perspective, so RDN, we traditionally manage the beginning and the end. So we have the landfill and the middle pieces we let other people manage, and we help them out. Landfill airspace, if I'm remembering Mr. Huron's correct slide correctly, the amount of airspace consumed with just the waste going in the last period of time is worth about $30 million. By the end of the life of the landfill, if we were to tack that onto the end, it's worth closer to about $70 million in landfill airspace. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Not seeing any other questions, so our next... Oh.
Sorry. Could I just respond to one of Councillor Thorpe's questions? Is that possible? Or is there?
Please, yeah.
He asked about non-bylaw initiatives, so other types of ways in which this could be addressed, and I just wanted to speak to education and outreach, funding programs like the Building Material Exchange, which is providing options for storing and recirculating these materials. But I did want to stress that nothing, in the experience that we've had in every jurisdiction, nothing compares to the impact and effectiveness of bylaws. So that's, just wanted to respond to that. And I just wanted to make an invitation to all of council to attend the opening of the expanded Habitat for Humanity in Nanaimo on September 1st. I believe you've received emails, but this is going to be one of the cornerstones of the ability for the city to store and recirculate building materials. So we're very excited about that and hope to see you all there. Thank you.
Yes, thank you for getting that on our radar early. Next up, we have Darren Moss from Tectonica and the Nanaimo Development Group. Thank you for being here, Mr. Moss.
Thank you very much, Chair and councillors. My presentation will not have a PowerPoint presentation. I'm here more to just share thoughts and kind of sort of reflect back on what I've heard today so far. I find this a very interesting topic because A, it's dear to my heart the environment, I think it's important that we take very dramatic steps to change how we respect the environment in all aspects of our lives. But at the same time, I think it's important to look at each decision in the context of where we're at as a whole in both city, province, world. And when I think about the demolition bylaw, I try to roll it back to what we're hoping to achieve with it and what the impacts are if we try to implement this. And so when I think about demolition bylaw, I hear quite often about diversion from the landfill, because our landfill has a finite life, a value, and the cost of it. And then I hear about the environmental benefits of a demolition bylaw. And I think of the two as a little bit, well, parallel binary. I think that if we're just focused on diverting from the landfill itself, there might be other alternatives that could be implemented that would affect that change without the need for a demolition bylaw. If we're talking about the greater environmental impact, I kind of believe that there are steps to put in place prior to a demolition bylaw that would lead to a better implementation of a bylaw. We've heard many of them talked about today, but there's education, there's the ability to decouple the timing of demolition from the sale or reuse of product. There's the relocation of homes, all super valuable. But whether the bylaw should come first or some other tools should come first, I think is an important consideration. The other reality of where we are in Nanaimo right now is we've talked many times before about the reality of our permitting process. It's a very challenging process, and people are still actively avoiding Nanaimo because of the realities of our permitting process. The timing of a building permit is not the only piece. The complexity of which the complexity of making a building permit application in Nanaimo is also a very real challenge. And as we add complexity to those building permit processes, we need to be very aware that that's going to augment that effect. And I bring this up not to say that it's not worth that effort for the potential gain, but that perhaps every change comes with a need for energy and money, and that perhaps right now the time is to focus on the building permit process and how to simplify that process and to deal with the realities of that current process before we add more process on top of it. Staff is finite, resources are finite, and we need to make sure we're applying these in a way that meets the greater good as judged by yourselves for our community. I do believe that there are many initiatives that could be put in without the need of a bylaw that would achieve multiple pieces of what we've heard today. And that would be my recommendation, is that we make sure we be very deliberate in our desire to move environmental stewardship forward and how we improve things. But perhaps we consider initiatives that are not the bylaw first and make sure we put pieces in place that will lead to a successful implementation of bylaw in the future.
Councillor Perino.
Thank you, Chair. Question through you to Mr. Moss. Thank you. Breath of fresh air, as always. Can you just suggest some things that would work instead of the bylaw discussion? I just give us a couple of ideas of what because you work in this every day. So you're not the one that's doing the bylaw, you're the one that's actually living the work. And that for me is the most important piece, because it's we're all trying to do the right thing, but when you're actually there on the ground trying to do the work, what are you suggesting that would be an alternate to, say, developing a bylaw at this time? You said there's other ways. What other ways?
Yeah, I think I have said I believe there are, and I believe they're there to be found. I don't believe I am the expert to be speaking to what they are. This is a very complex issue. I may bring a vantage point on it, but you're surrounded by experts in this field as well that may not be saying the same thing as me, and that's important to hear.
Okay.
But I believe there are tools that could be brought forward if council decided to ask this group to think of other options. There would be other options this group and others could bring forward. Yeah, I don't think I am the expert in how to do the waste management. It's a very complex issue that we've been talking about for at least 15 years around this table with myself. So,
if I may ask another question, the discussion that Ms. Vander Ross brought up about location for homes, is that an option that sounds interesting to you? An actual separate location where you can actually put homes that could later be bought and moved at another time?
I think and believe not just Nickel Brothers, but there's many organizations around North America that have made a wonderful example of how we can reuse our homes by relocating them. And there's challenges that they continuously work to find ways to work with at a regulatory level. But absolutely, if we can reuse homes, we can provide homes at lower value and avoid landfill. It's of course an option we should be exploring.
Okay, and the other, Councillor Gessler brought it up about, you know, if you took, say, landfill and put demolition goods in particular areas where organizations could manage it so that they could be sold, given away, whatever the circumstances are. Is that an option that would be of interest to the development community?
I think that if we're going to be actively trying to deconstruct some buildings and find creative uses for those products, we need a way to sort and decouple the timing. So yes, I think it's a very important piece.
Okay. Thank you very much.
Thank you. And that leads us right into our next presentation by Mr. Routledge with the RDN and Sonia Bajwa, Solid Waste Planner with the RDN. Thanks for being here.
Thank you for having us, Chair. Let's wait for the slide deck to load. Thank you. So we're going to talk a little bit about the past, the present, and the future in the presentation today. So in the 1980s, the per capita waste rate was about 1,084 kilograms, or just over 1 ton of material per person into the landfill each year. By 1990, that number had fallen to about 550 kilograms per person, or about a 50% reduction in landfill materials. Since then, we have managed to reduce the per capita landfill rate to 384 kilograms in 2021. Our current solid waste management plan seeks a 90% reduction in the per capita waste rate, which is just about 109 kilos per person by 2030. Landfill disposal bans can be quite difficult. When issuing a ban, the RDN needs to make sure that the materials are not just being shipped out of the region. We focus on collaboration with haulers and waste generators and seek to increase fees on items until a point where they will reach and go to an end recycling market. Historically, the RDN has held meetings and worked on building trust with haulers so that they understand that our regulations would result in higher waste diversion, not just end up in landfill. There is also a strong focus on education for generators of waste, workshops, creating promotional and educational material with lots of follow-up involved. In 2020, the RDN released its approved solid waste management plan. The plan is made up of programs and initiatives designed to improve how waste materials are recycled, composted, and reused in our region. It provides a 10-year vision to divert 90% of our waste from the landfill. Some of these key initiatives include expanded zero waste education, household hazardous waste, expanded industrial, commercial, and institutional waste diversion programs, mandatory waste source separation, and waste haul licensing. With the 68% diversion we have, and around 17% from the new programs and 5% from future EPR programs, we'll be able to reach the 90% diversion goal, and eventually end up at a place where we have zero waste, no material going to landfill. But to achieve that will require the adoption of the circular economy and materials being designed for repurpose, reuse in the market. As one of the successful 2024 and 2025 applicants to the Regional District of Nanaimo Zero Waste Recycling Funding Program, Lighthouse has received partial funding to help develop a community-led construction, renovation, and demolition materials exchange program. Our key principles are a full user pay system. Tipping fees are set at a level to encourage recycling, curbside limits, and continued encouragement of private investment through landfill bans. Again, continuing to work closely with haulers and building trust, all while working on a licensing regime for the private sector to help create a level playing field. All materials are accepted in accordance with RDN Bylaw 1784, and all materials coming into landfill and transfer station are cataloged for reporting and for tracking. The RDN's construction sector is a significant employer, accounting for at least 9.5% of labor force, if not more. However, the growth of this sector has increased pressure on local landfills due to the waste generated from construction and demolition activities. A study revealed that 58% of landfill materials could be reused, recycled, or composted, with substantial contributions from construction and the commercial sectors. Reducing building material waste by 50%, as illustrated, could save 295 garbage trucks of waste and at least 1,185 tons of greenhouse gas emissions per year. The construction industry can significantly impact waste diversion targets through practices such as deconstruction, salvaging, and material reuse. Building a 2,000 square foot home produces around 17,500 kilograms of waste. Without a diversion program, all of this waste, equivalent to the weight of 8 full-size half-ton trucks, will end up in our landfill. However, a comprehensive recycling system can redirect most of these materials away from the landfill. Establishing a recycling station is a significant step in sustainability efforts. Diverting waste can lower disposal costs by up to 30%, and yet many construction sites still use a single bin system, resulting in over 90% of waste ending up in a landfill. For example, in 2021, Hearst Avenue Townhouses in Parksville, in partnership with Tectonica Management, opted to deconstruct rather than demolish the existing structures at the Duo Townhomes construction site, achieving a 90% waste diversion rate by weight. Only 6%, or 43,000 kilos, of the 750,000 kilos of material were brought to the landfill. Construction and demolition waste represents a significant portion of landfill inputs. However, with proper material recovery practices, up to 95% can be diverted. The RDN developed a construction waste best practices guide, which provides industry members with strategies to minimize waste and enhance environmental performance, and highlights a directory of services, facilities, and depots where materials can be recycled and reused within the region. Additionally, we have the What Goes Where app tool on our curbside app to help residents find appropriate disposal options. I'll note in this slide that C&D waste constitutes about 5%, and there's a little star there. So what happens is that we only identify loads coming in that are truly C&D waste or construction demo if the hauler identifies it as such. Otherwise, we code it in as MSW for tracking purposes to the province. Two major initiatives from the 2020 Solid Waste Management Plan. Sorry, there you go. Two major initiatives from the 2020 Solid Waste Management Plan amendment that are particularly significant for us this year are mandatory waste source separation and waste haul licensing. Mandatory waste source separation will require all businesses, multifamily dwellings, and institutions to have the 3-bin system: garbage, food waste, and recycling. We have extremely high participation rates in our curbside program, as well as in the City of Nanaimo curbside program. And we want to see the same level of service for commercial and multifamily across the region. We project that we can improve our overall diversion rate by 10% when these programs are fully initiated. Second initiative was waste haul licensing. So earlier, or prior to 2025, if someone has waste, they would bring it to the landfill, or they might hire a hauler to bring it in. Waste haul licensing requires that all waste haulers operating in the RDN to have an annual license. By reducing the hauler's cost through the program, they are able to offer more competitive prices to residents, and in turn, divert more material from the landfill. The disposal levy, which will only be applied to loads that do not comply with the bylaw, will be levied at a future date to help drive further waste diversion. Paired with mandatory waste source separation, these two programs are two of the main initiatives that will get us to our 90% waste diversion. Sorry, I've missed a slide. This is what happens when they give me the controller. Apologies. Waste stream management licensing created a whole industry around recycling. The goal was environmental protection, having high standards, and a common regulatory framework with a legal dumping prevention. At the introductory stages of the disposal bans, all through our bylaws, all materials that came into landfill were inspected, and the fine received could be up to 3 times the tipping fee, which is extremely steep. This is why communication and relationship building is so key within the waste industry. As the programs mature, it became a surcharge, which is what we're using right now. So we move away from a fee and a fine into a surcharge. And it's a lower amount, a more economical amount to help drive that behavioral change. As I mentioned in our previous slide, the RDN does have a compliance officer coming in line in the next couple of months who will be out at the landfill and the transfer station screening loads to help ensure compliance with source separation and to help provide that education piece on the site. As we look to build and grow the circular economy, new and evolving processes that adjust our view of waste will need to be supported. Deconstruction and demolition programs, specifically bylaws, allow local and regional governments to bring materials that would otherwise be landfilled back into the economy. Ensuring success will require interconnected and well-functioning systems, accurately staffed and funded to support timely and financial benefits to deconstruction and easy accessibility and economical viability to end markets for those materials recovered. Thank you.
Mayor Krog.
Thank you very much, Chair. In the report, it says that building materials comprise 7% of the commercial waste that goes into the landfill. And just pulling this out of the air, can you comment one way or the other what percentage of that is coming from the city of Nanaimo as opposed to the rest of the regional district?
Through the chair, so the housing, sorry, let me go back. There is approximately 30,000 households in the city of Nanaimo. There's approximately 30,000 households outside of the city of Nanaimo. So what we look at is urban centers will traditionally produce more waste. It's hard to really say exactly how much is coming from each zone. What we could do is look at our tracking and determine how much was coming from the curbside programs. And then from there, we can determine that roughly 17,000 tons per year is coming out of the northern communities. Some of the material that does go to the transfer station, which is where that number came from, is from residents of North Nanaimo. It's just easier to get to the transfer station sometimes. But to really pin it down is a hard task.
Thank you.
Councillor Manley.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you for the presentation. We heard earlier on that the Heartland landfill has created space for materials to sort them out and make them available. Is there room at the regional district landfill to do something similar?
Thank you for the question. The regional landfill is nearing, so even though we have about 31 years worth of useful life left, the only available space is for the active landfill. We are very limited in the amount of space that we have for residential drop-off to facilitate that at that site.
Okay, so you would need space elsewhere, and you don't have, the regional district likely doesn't have space. It would require land purchase, or?
I wouldn't be able to confirm or deny. I feel like I'm in a movie right now. I couldn't confirm or deny that. I'd have to look into what the property was like.
Okay. Yeah, and then I'm curious, maybe Mr. Yaron can tell us how much space is going to be available at the new Habitat for Humanity site, because I don't know, is that a new location, a new piece of land that Habitat for Humanity has? Mr. Yaron?
Yes, thank you, Councillor. It's not a new land. It's the site on Mowbray Road where they are. But it's maximizing. They had quite a bit of underutilized space, and so we've reconfigured. It's a complete redesign of the facility, and so there's a bunch of exterior yard space that's going to handle a lot of materials, as well as a redesign of the interior. So there's currently there's quite a bit of space there. I think the total square footage, actually I'd have to get back to you on the total with the exterior. I can't tell you exactly what it is off the top of my head. And there is still additional space that has not, we're going to see how much volume we get. There's additional space available that's still not being utilized.
Okay, thank you. Yeah, I think space has been identified as one of the problems, and so land is at a real premium these days. So trying to find space to put materials and sort them seems like one of the major roadblocks. But thank you.
Councillor Marino.
Thank you, Chair. Question through you to Mr. Rutledge. In the regional district, how many companies do we have that do separation on their property for demolition, building demolition? I know of at least one.
Thank you for the question. I'll look to Ms. Bajwa if she can provide an exact number.
There we go. Sorry about that. Specifically, I can't say how many there are, but often what we've seen is if there is a single family home that is looking to do a deconstruction, it doesn't necessarily have to be a business within the RDN. So there'll be
Right.
businesses in Metro Vancouver or Victoria, like Tectonica, has done deconstruction within the regional district. They do them within the Capital Regional District, and they do them in Metro Vancouver as well. So there's an opportunity to pull from other regions even if they aren't necessarily based in our region, just because
Okay.
of the relationships that they have with the other organizations in our region.
Okay, and the reason that I'm asking the question is because if we have private companies that are doing this, why would we be doing this at the RDN landfill? Like, why would we take that challenge on when it's already being done by private enterprise?
Through the chair, it's all about scale. So further to the first question, I know of at least 3 locations that are practicing this.
Yes.
There's likely more than that, as Ms. Bajwa stated. It's about the scale and the volume of material that we're seeing. We're still seeing a lot of material come into the landfill just as a backhoe or some sort of heavy equipment went into that home, tore it down, put it in the back of the truck, gets hauled into the landfill.
Okay.
So as we increase, our bylaw and our requirements to divert those materials away, the volume of reusable material will increase. It's very similar to pop bottles and other things like that. There was at one time 1 or 2 depots in town. I believe now there's upwards of 11 locations. You can take back bottles, let alone all the grocery stores. So it's that scale. It will increase, and based on the numbers that we've seen, it will increase quite quickly.
Okay, and the reason, for me, are we ready to actually have a bylaw, I guess is the question. Given what Mr. Moss was talking about, are we at the stage where we are really ready to put a bylaw in when we have to have the facilities ready to take on enough of the separation product? We have to have a way to sell it. Are we putting a bylaw in too soon, I guess is my next question, and that's my final question.
Through the chair, that's probably best answered by yourselves, our elected officials.
Okay.
I would say that as economy grows, solutions present themselves. And so people like Mr. Yaron can probably comment on this. As that demand increases, we see industry step up and take on that role. Industry's job is to make money. At the end of the day, local government is not in the business to make money. We're here to provide service. So
That's right.
bylaws will create that. We've seen that with our organics ban, Convertis facility that takes all of the organics collected from the RDN and City of Nanaimo's curbside programs, as well as all the other locations from around the island, or around the region, sorry. It invested money into its facility to be able to meet our capacity needs for the next 10 years. And so, that's industry stepping up to answer that call and meet that need.
Okay, thank you. Thank you
I
for the
see,
presentation.
Mr. Yaron would like to weigh in on this.
Yeah, exactly what Mr. Rutledge said. It's a chicken and egg thing all the time, policy first or infrastructure first. And we've seen consistently in every jurisdiction that's implemented the policy that the materials have been absorbed into the market. So industry has responded to that. And on the other hand, when you don't have policy in place, the response time of industry to change and adapt is glacial. So we strongly we have lots of evidence to support the need for policy as the driver.
Okay, thank you.
Councillor Gesselbrecht.
Thanks. Yeah, with the sorting area, I mean, that would be something that could be addressed. Like, I know at the Heartland landfill, it's actually the contract, I think, is with Milner and another company, private company deal that do the sorting, and so it actually created space to support these private companies to do more of the recycling industry than they'd done before. But my question is just, like, when we're using the term bylaw in sort of a panacea to include everything, and we're talking about looking at ways to regulate, like the goal to divert from the landfill. There's a hierarchy, and the lowest is sort of like just the recycling end is like, that's already happening in the sense like the capacity by industry is there. We have the mandatory source separation bylaw in place. It's just more like compliance to people actually like follow it. And then another aspect of the bylaw could be this salvaging deconstruction thing, which is building something newer that doesn't already exist, and adding that into this bylaw as well. And my question is just like, if we're looking at this as a tiered thing, right now, just, 50% of demolition is already separating things out, but there's also companies that aren't and are still throwing in one bin, even though they don't need to. Now we have this mandatory source separation bylaw in place, or the hauler licensing, which incentivizes the haulers to have separated material that actually can save money in terms of the levy that we put on it. So there's incentive from the haulers. My question is that with a municipal bylaw just around the recycling end of it, at the base layer, is that complementary to what we're doing, and would we see more material being recycled if that's in place for those that maybe haven't sort of gotten up to speed with what's going on? Similar to like on the commercial end, it's like we have the hauler licensing, and then we're asking every company in Nanaimo to have the 3 bins, and that's a bylaw that requires that, so that's separated, and it makes it easy for the haulers to do their job, and vice versa. So my question is would a bylaw, one tier of our bylaw that focuses on reuse, be complementary to what we're doing at the RDN and improve compliance to actually just do what we're asking?
Thank you for the question. In short, yes, it would. And there's a lot to unpack there. I mean, any bylaw comes with education and really reaching out and highlighting to the people that are engaging with the bylaw what the benefit is. I mean, with the waste haulers, we just got authority, a few years ago. We just implemented waste haul licensing on January 1st. We're still seeing that program, start to be developed. We probably won't start to actually enforce it in the sense of monetary enforcement for at least another 6 months, because we're doing that education. The education is such an important part of it. As we move down the road and we start to see materials coming in that could be diverted, that's where it adds another economic layer to the bylaw. So it's no one piece. I guess I can say it's not like the linear economy. It is very much like the circular economy. There's a piece to everything as it fits together, and it's really making sure that they complement each other and then reinforce each other so that they have this supportive system. It's no longer going to be able to solely rely on one source. You're going to have multiple interconnected systems.
Great, thank you.
Mr. Moss?
To yourself, Chair, I'm not sure, is it possible for me to ask questions to my neighbor through you? Or is that not allowed in this forum?
Yeah, go for it.
It's just a simple one. I'm curious, as we think of different alternative tools, as the requirement for asbestos-containing waste changes and landfills restrict that, is it done through bylaw or is it done through regulation at the landfill level?
Thank you for the question. So it's done at both levels. So there's a regulatory requirement through the Environmental Management Act and the Hazardous Waste Regulation. So anybody generating asbestos over a certain volume has to follow certain procedures. Under that volume, there's a separate set of procedures, and then at the landfill, it's also enforced. And so we do that through the bylaw itself by delineating the cost for asbestos, but we also do it at the site level where we only accept asbestos on certain days under certain parameters. If those parameters aren't met, and those are namely WorkSafe regulations, then we refuse the load. So it's a complementary system.
Thank you.
Thank you for that. Ms. Ricard, do we have our final presentation joining us?
Thank you, Madam Chair. Staff have reached out to Mr. Hodgins, and we're not able to establish contact with him, so unfortunately he's not able to join us today.
Okay, thank you. Please.
Sorry, can I revisit a question that Councillor Perino asked?
Yes.
You were talking about the homes in storage for a year. I just wanted to make sure I didn't give the impression that most of our homes go into storage. No, okay, all right. I was gonna say most relocation companies, like, our goal is always to move right from A to B.
Exactly.
Storage is not ideal, but sometimes necessary. Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, Council. I'm not seeing any other questions. Would anyone like to? Mayor Krog?
Thank you very much. And these are sort of general questions. The BC building code obviously may provide some issues, and I'm wondering if anyone can comment on that. And I'm thinking particularly of a home that's been moved. You know, we have very modern standards around insulation and heat loss, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And I subscribe to the view, don't let the pursuit of the perfect stand in the way of doing the good. I was thinking about some of the materials that would come out of a house that wouldn't meet modern standards for recyclability, doors, for instance, windows, that are in fact, depending on what your economic ability is, might be just fine, thank you very much, but might not meet modern standards. So I'm just wondering if anyone can comment on the code, and should we be looking at saying to the provincial government, we'll lessen standards for things when we are in, reduce standards when we're talking about reusing something that already exists, that already had a carbon footprint in creating it, that already had a carbon footprint in moving it or shipping it or to wherever. And I'm just wondering if anyone cares to comment on that.
Yeah, so there is a bulletin. I'm going to speak to relocated homes first, and then I'll touch on the deconstruction portion. So there's a bulletin included in the information package, which is from the BC government. They released it last year, and it basically outlines the fact that relocated homes are considered existing buildings under Part 9 of the BC Building Code, which means that they don't need to be upgraded as new homes when they're moved to a new location. The benefit of that is that, like any other existing home, they're still going to get upgraded over time with maintenance, but we're not going to have that embodied carbon, that big embodied carbon dump from, tearing it down and rebuilding it. For the National Building Code, there is a code change request currently that they're reviewing to have that same standard. Right now, it's in the appendix of the National Building Code, so it's like a guideline, but not an actual rule. And there's a code change request right now where they're working on putting that into the code so that it would be a rule rather than a guideline. So hopefully that will remain pretty standard for the next at least 10 years or so. For deconstruction, I think it is a challenge to get lumber recertified. I know Eric, who owns Vima Deconstruction in Metro Vancouver, is working to have some regulations changed around that. There's also the provincial government has a relaxation for heritage homes, like it's a relaxation chart for heritage homes. And I know that the Ministry of Housing has tossed around that a similar chart could be made for other types of buildings and other types of materials if they would support climate action. So not that there's necessarily that happening yet, but I think those kinds of solutions exist and are on people's radar. And if that's ever a conversation you want to have further, let me know.
Thank you. And Ms. Bajwa, you want to weigh in?
I do, yes. So I can't necessarily speak directly to the building code, but in general, when we're having conversations around deconstruction and the general philosophy around deconstruction and the circular economy, having advocacy at a local, provincial, and federal level is really important because it's outside of just tearing the building down, but it's also advocacy on the side of when you're building a new home in the first place. Building it, trying to have requirements for consideration of deconstruction when you're building new buildings, whether it's homes, apartments, other commercial complexes. So there is definitely opportunity for advocacy outside of just the building code that can be really effective coming from local government to a provincial or federal government, like through UBCM or something along those lines.
Thank you. And Mr. Yaron, I see your hand as well.
Sorry.
Oh, you're muted still.
I think I'm good now. Thank you.
Sorry.
I just wanted to.
Sorry, just pardon me.
Sorry.
I'm going online to Mr. Yaron.
Okay, sorry, Cassidy. Back to you in a second. I just wanted to, in addition to the comments that Cassidy made, when it comes to deconstruction, one of the things we really like to emphasize is that while there is this current restriction on using salvage lumber for new construction, there are a myriad of non-structural applications for these materials. And so there's, we're not anywhere near the point where we have so much fiber coming out of homes that we don't know what to do with it, and that we need to use it for structural applications. Also, it just requires an engineer's approval in order to use lumber. While it can be regraded, there's a more direct route to get an engineer to certify the wood for reuse. And in terms of things like windows and doors, again, even when a home is, if it's relocated or if it's deconstructed and those materials are those types of materials are salvaged, there are a significant number of ways in which those materials can get reused for other types of applications that aren't necessarily in new residential homes. So,
Thank you.
Thank you, and if
Oh, pardon me? You may.
And if I may, a question to staff, any idea of the age of the housing in Nanaimo, and I'm talking of single-family dwellings that might be the subject of any bylaw that's passed or consideration for reconstruction, demolition, moving, or whatever the case may be?
Yeah, thank you, Mayor Krog, through the chair. In terms of how a bylaw would be implied, that would be something we would, if we're directed to proceed with a bylaw, something we could consult with industry. As Mr. Holm mentioned, in Victoria, they started actually looking at homes built after 1960, and that's actually expanded on now currently to all homes within the city of Victoria. They also looked at exempting SMERBs over a certain size, and that again, they no longer exempt that. So that was one way the city of Victoria phased in. In terms of the age of homes typically deconstructed in Nanaimo, there's some stats on that in the report. Typically, most of those homes were built prior to 1975.
Thank you. And if I may, Chair, one more question to Mr. Moss in particular. In the report on page 16, it said, while the stakeholders recognize the economic opportunity in embracing circular economy principles, they generally favor a phased approach with a focus on education before regulation. I'm just wondering if you can comment on that statement in the report.
That sounds like something I might have said when we were talking, for sure. I'm a big fan of carrot rather than stick, and as we try to implement waste separation on our construction sites, we spend most of our time educating the change. It's not normal in the construction industry yet, and I'd love if it were, but when we deconstructed Hearst Avenue, it was very much a partnership. We couldn't have done it without NRE at the time. They found all the homes for most of the material. We held garage sales, we did all this stuff, but getting the trades to think about waste separation was a huge challenge, and then to think about how to find new uses for those and get the community thinking about that was the other challenge. So while it was a success, it wasn't just Tectonica that did it. It was very much a partnership with a lot of people, and that education was a big piece of that.
And if I may, Chair, one more, indulge me. You commented earlier in your presentation about the how shall I say, the view of Nanaimo as a place to build. Is it fair to say you're suggesting to us that if we bring in a bylaw, it will be seen as another layer of expense, if you will, that will increase the cost of new construction in the community?
Yeah, again, we're talking about a fairly vague definition of a bylaw right now. So I think I was trying to imply that definitely a layer of complexity in the application process would probably be inherent in it. Whether there's a cost to it or not doesn't necessarily mean there has to be, but it sounds like there is a bonding requirement on most of the ones that have been implemented, then a tracking, then a sign-off process through reporting. And so I believe that does add layers of complexity.
Thank you, Chair.
Councillor Manley.
Thank you, Chair. I have another question just related to the difference between construction and deconstruction waste. do you know of that 7%, what the breakdown is between construction waste and deconstruction waste?
Through the chair, I'm sorry, I don't. We don't differentiate like that.
Okay. Yeah, I just know like construction waste can be astronomical, and my son-in-law is actually working at the Cowichan Valley Regional Hospital building. He's saying it's appalling, the stuff that's going into bins there. And I have friends that work in the film industry as well, where they just load up trucks with 4x8 sheets of plywood and send them to the dump. And so those kind of things I'd like to see, especially when it's good material, ways of making sure that we're source separating. That's it for my questions. I'd actually like to move option 1 if you're ready for that, Chair.
Yes, certainly if you'd like to move option 1. Do we have a seconder? Seconded by Councillor Gesselbrecht.
If I
Councillor
may.
Thorpe is next up on the speaking order, but if you wanted to speak to it first, yeah.
I'll speak to the motion after.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah. Okay. No, I think like just hearing, what the development community has to say about this, I think that what we need to work on is an incremental approach, incremental implementation, making sure that industry has certainty around when this is going to come into place, how it's going to come into place, work on the education piece. But I think that allows industry to build around a deconstruction process and around a recycling process and how to reuse these materials. And it provides certainty to those entrepreneurs and industries that are interested in getting involved in a waste management system as a business. And so I don't want to rush into this, and I think we also need to look at, I'm also more in favor of carrots than sticks, and so figuring out ways that it's not punitive, but guides the industry forward. So those are the kind of things I'd be looking for in a bylaw and how it's implemented. Thanks.
Thank you. Councillor Thorpe.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. Through you, and some of the arguments that Councillor Manley is making in favor of his motion for option 1 are the arguments I would use to vote against option 1. I think we do need a very incremental approach here, and I guess I feel that one thing that has not been addressed in our conversation today, and it's perhaps a shame that the last delegation couldn't join us, is the fact that, yeah, we all want to keep stuff out of the landfill. We all want to support the circular economy, all those good things. Everybody agrees with that, I think. But we're also dealing with what is a free enterprise system. And if we are looking at deconstruction as opposed to demolition of a house, let's say, on a very simplistic level, if it is too onerous or costly for deconstruction, I'm not going to bid on that job. On the other hand, if I am made aware of economic opportunities for profit, that I can reuse the materials and I have a place to sort them and sell them, well, as my Scottish relative often points out, there's money in muck, but you have to know about those opportunities to make the money. So to me, a bylaw is, at this point, I would say premature and too prescriptive. I would much rather us focus on the educational aspect of this. And I do value the information that we received in the staff report from our stakeholders, and including Mr. Moss, but not limited to him. And they are very clear that they also favor, and I'll read what he or somebody said, generally favored a phased approach with a focus on education before regulation. So that's where I'm at on this. We all want to get to the same place, but I don't feel that a bylaw at this point is the best way to proceed. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Gesselbrecht.
Thanks. I think first off, like just stepping back, I was just like looking at my home this morning and just like looking at the amount of material that exists in a house. The wood, the metal, all the fixtures. And I was just like thinking about how we created the system where we've like gotten really good at building stuff. You know, we clear the land, we get the trees, mill it up, you know, mine the minerals, and then we build these houses. And nobody thought what we're going to do when they come end of life. And there's been zero planning in our whole economic system around this problem because we've been able to externalize that cost. We've got a landfill, and when that building's done, we just, in the past, collapsed it all down and brought it to the landfill. Well, we're finding out that one, it costs a lot of money to manage a landfill. Our landfill is coming to end of life, and it's actually quite expensive, a cubic meter of landfill space. And we're actually going to have to start contemplating siting a new landfill, and imagine trying to figure out where to put another one in the RDN and the expense to that. So just the landfill space expense, but then we also talk about all the materials. You know, I've done a few renovation jobs and cutting into old growth lumber in a house. It's amazing the strength and the quality of that material, which you can't get really anymore unless you want to go harvest more, and that's becoming increasingly difficult. So I think we have the opportunity to actually create economic opportunity in Nanaimo. And I was just talking to a gentleman from a demolition deconstruction company, because these companies now, it's both, and he's been waiting for Nanaimo to get on with these bylaws, because when a bylaw puts in place, it sets a direction of where the community is going to go. And he's waiting for this opportunity in Nanaimo, and he's actually relocated down to Victoria and brought his company down there because they have these bylaws in place that create a whole opportunity and economy to operate within. And we've done that in Nanaimo too, as we talked about. We regulated compost. You can't, you know, you can't go throw organic material away. And when we did that, we created a whole industry around a whole compost facility that has jobs, and recirculating this material is being sold. We can do that when we put in bans on drywall or shingles. I can't remember exactly all the materials. Milner invested a huge amount of money to be able to source separate all these materials, and it's created jobs and opportunity. So this is an opportunity to just expand on this idea of economic development in our community. Now, in the conversation that we've had around this bylaw, we've kind of been using this sort of a panacea word, but there's actually different elements of it. At the base level, what we already have established in our community is the ability to recycle 95% of the materials within a building. There's a place to put the shingles. Those go and they go into like road material. There's a place to put the metals. It gets melted down. There's a place to put the concrete. It gets ground out. There's a place to put the wood. Now, the wood right now is being ground up and burnt as hog fuel. There's probably a higher, better use, and we can extract more value out of these material. But we have the ability to move these materials. However, there's just such an old carryover that maybe only 50% of the buildings being demolished are being separated out and reused. And really, at the base level, a bylaw that just deals with recycling would just ensure that everybody is doing what we can already do. And it just sets a basic minimum standard. And I think a bylaw that we have should at least do that, and it complements the source, the mandatory source separation bylaw and the waste hauler bylaw. And then on top of that, I think that we definitely should consider salvaging, because there is a lot of value in these materials there. But as being discussed, if we just immediately put a salvaging requirement on, okay, it would cause some disruption. So we need that lag time, we need education, we need to develop maybe a sorting site. And if we have a phased approach to our bylaw, we can do that. And it seems simple to have a checklist that, of course, we're going to check to see if a building should be relocated and look into that. And that's the first check mark if you're going to go for a demolition permit. I think all these things can be captured in a very pragmatic way that is phased and doesn't put overburden on private industry, but creates opportunity for us to expand our economy. Thank you.
Mayor Krog.
Thank you very much, Chair. I'm inclined to agree with Councillor Thorpe today on this one. In terms of where we're at, I appreciate there are other communities that have brought in bylaws. I'd be more interested in hearing more information over time as to how that's actually working and what is the practical impact. I mean, this is a laudable goal, right? We'd all love to live in a perfect world where we don't have to keep mining and we are extracting resources to create, that everything would be reused, recycled, et cetera, et cetera. I've been an admirer of Nickel Brothers since I was an articled law student, because they were a client of the firm I articled at, for heaven's sakes, when they were a much smaller company. So I have how shall I say, a fondness and respect for what they've accomplished in British Columbia. Having said that, the term used was a phased approach with a focus on education. It seems to me that without having to create full-time staff positions, which is potentially what we're looking at, if we bring in a bylaw, let alone the time that's going to be spent creating a bylaw, that some education around this that might encourage entrepreneurial types that Councillor Gesselbrock is talking about would be an effective way to approach this. I'm not satisfied that the mere creation of a bylaw in and of itself would do anything other than send a signal to what I'll call the green side of the community, the yes, Nanaimo's on board with the 21st century and here we go, as opposed to the message it may send to the business community, which is here's Nanaimo with another regulation that's going to make it harder for us to take down existing structures and construct the new housing that this city desperately wants. So for what it's worth, I'm not actually satisfied that, no disrespect to staff or the presenters here today, that, and it's my limited intelligence, I'm not satisfied that I've had enough material to satisfy me that this is going to be a good step overall, that it won't lead to more discouragement than encouragement, so to speak. So for what it's worth, I'm not prepared to support what is referred to as option one. We do have a second building bylaw amendment, though, which I think is fairly simple and straightforward, and we'll get on with debating that, and I'll happily support that. But at this stage, I'm just not satisfied that we will do what everyone hopes the creation of a bylaw will do. It may, and you know what, I appreciate that if it comes back, who knows, I may be convinced, but at this stage, I'm not on board.
Councillor Perino.
Thank you, Chair. Just my comments are exactly the same as Mayor Krogh and Councillor Thorpe, but the one thing that I want to make clear is I think we're moving in the right direction. I think we're getting there, but my concern is that we're adding another layer of bureaucracy to our development community without, as Mr. Moss said, we can't even get the permits going in a timely manner yet where we want them to be. And I know staff are working so hard to do that, but it's not happening yet. And to add yet another layer, but I think we're moving in the right direction. I think education is important, but for the viewing public, we want to make sure that we do this right. And there's still a lot of questions to be answered. I'm just not there yet, so I'll be voting against it. Thank you.
Councillor Manley.
Thank you. Just to a couple of points here. One of my jobs here as a councillor is to protect taxpayers. And what we currently have is a system that externalizes the costs of demolition of buildings. And that cost is borne by the taxpayers in the way of filling up a landfill that has got a lifespan on it of 20 years. And I know we've been at the RDN meetings, we've talked about tens of millions of dollars, you know, in the $100 million range of finding another place to put all this stuff. And so when we externalize costs, we actually download private costs onto taxpayers and expect that the taxpayers are going to hold the bill for this. And so I understand that it will change the cost of doing business, but actually it's not just the right thing to do environmentally, it's not just the right thing to do on a planet with finite resources. And if we think we're going to Mars to find things to build with, we're really batting up the wrong tree here. we need to start thinking about how we reuse these materials and stop wasting them and protect the taxpayers to ensure that we are not downloading costs onto taxpayers. The cost of a new landfill is astronomical, and people need to understand that. We need to stop dumping stuff and burying it in a hole that is turned into a mountain.
Councillor Hemmons.
Thank you, Chair. A couple of questions. I'm hearing that a bylaw is too prescriptive, and I'm also hearing that we can do a phased approach. So I guess my question is for staff, and that's that if this passes, how do you interpret next steps? And when do we determine if it's a 0.5 FTE versus a 1.5 FTE? Is that a budget decision? Will the bylaw come back with, here's an education piece that we can begin with and implementation comes later? Like, I'm just trying to, I feel like we're talking black and white, but it's completely gray, and I'm trying to track that.
Yeah, thank you through the chair to Councillor Hemmons. So, yeah, there is a lot to unpack and in this, and education sort of necessary. I mean, there'd be education around the implementation of a bylaw, but it's not necessarily going to have the, I think, the intended effect of a broader discussion with industry and some of the bigger pieces around, moving collectively together towards a circular economy. It's not going to achieve that. A bylaw on its own would not. As far as what the implications would be in the range of additional staff requirements, we put a range in of 0.5 based on discussions with other communities have done this work, 0.5 to 1.5 FTE. It is going to depend on how extensive the bylaw is. What does it apply to every form of demolition, or as Victoria did, is it just single-family homes that are earlier than 1960? So it would depend on the scope of the bylaw or the range of demolition that it would demolition permits or approvals that it would affect, there would be a range of administrative impact based on the scope of the bylaw. We would bring that forward with the bylaw for consideration. There could be a range of options. It could, and other communities have done a phased approach. That's not unusual. But we'll have and it could be that it would ramp up and increase the administrative burden over time. But there obviously would be a phased approach would give industry time to adjust. There's going to be an administrative burden to industry. There is a complexity. There's additional layers in the permitting process. It's still to be determined yet too where this, the additional staff component would land. I would like to have building inspectors focused on building code and building inspection and approvals and approving occupancies hopefully at the end of the day. So this could land in another area as well. This is a much bigger, broader discussion, and there's a lot that gets layered on to, and you heard from Mr. Moss, there's a lot that gets layered on just because of where it lands in the approvals process on building inspections. There's a lot in there that we can have a conversation about that another time, but the staff is involved in at that level that goes well outside of building code. And this would be another one of those items, but we can definitely bring forward, if we get direction to, we can bring forward a bylaw, look at a phased approach, look at the administrative burden that would ramp up over time depending on the scope of the bylaw. And obviously there'd be input from industry, whether it was invited or not. There would be input from industry on the implications of adopting a bylaw as well. I hope that helps. Thanks.
So my interpretation, if I may, Chair, is that if we approve this today, it's a next step, a deepening, an investigation of where we potentially want to go. It is not the application of a new bylaw. It's not the...
I see Mr. Stewart wanting to jump in here.
I raised my hand to say exactly what Councillor Hemmons just said there. Actually, is essentially the next step would be to consult with industry further, as Mr. Holm concluded as well in his answer, beyond not just the representative, including the representatives in this room, but beyond that as well. So as we noted in the report, we've done some early consultation, but certainly we would consult further on all the elements of the draft bylaw identified in this report and bring forward some recommendations to council based on that. So the next step wouldn't necessarily, staff wouldn't immediately prepare a bylaw. We consult with industry next.
Could, Mr. Stewart, could the bylaw say for the next year or 18 months, we're going to do an education campaign? That's it? Or is that, are we too, then the bylaw is too prescriptive and that we should be moving that instead of the bylaw? I'm just trying to understand because I feel like we're talking about this fairy bylaw that I actually don't know what it includes right now and I'm being asked to vote on it. And I'm hearing from industry that and to hear us say we're going to go back and engage, but we've just engaged and they said this is really difficult for us to manage. We've had an increase in our CACs, our permit times are long, we're contemplating DCC increases, worn out. So I'm not, my decision point isn't clear for me here. And I'm
Mr. Lindsay?
Madam Chair, I guess from my perspective, the key decision council's making today is, in this item anyways, is do you want to head down a path of education today or do you want to head down a path of regulation? And passing option 1, my interpretation of that is council's intent is to bring in a bylaw to regulate this. To what degree, I think has been said, you know, I think there's a range there of the degree of regulation, but that recommendation would be for staff to bring back a bylaw versus a motion that would be staff to work on an education campaign, for example. I think obviously we'd bring back the bylaw, and as been said, you would get further feedback on that. Council could amend, change, decide not to proceed, but the decision today is, do you want to head down this path or not?
Thank you. That brings clarity to me.
Councillor Gesselbrecht, was the final comment?
Thanks. No, I think the comment made.
Oh, I'm sorry.
I think the comment made by Councillor Hemmons is a fair point in the sense, like, when we say, like, okay, we want to bring forward a bylaw, like, I think really what we would like is we'd like a program that will divert material, construction demolition material produced in Nanaimo from landfill and extract the highest value for the material to develop economic opportunities. And a program that would be successful has multiple components. Regulation is a part of it, and there's various levels of regulation. There's the minimal level, like, okay, we just want to do the recycling that we're already doing and make sure there's a certain minimal of that. Then we do a bunch of education. We work with the regional district to maybe look at a landing spot for salvage materials. We put out calls and develop, you know, maybe people work in the deconstruction industry. And when it gets to a certain point that, wow, we've got deconstruction happening in Nanaimo and in 10% of the buildings already, there's a site to set up, there's an end market, you know, it's very clear what we do to be able to, like, bring the rest of the industry players up to what's now possible, then that would be the next phase. And that's the way that we'd work. Things that we can do immediately in this program would be like, yeah, of course, we should assess a building if it could be relocated. That saves the entire building. It's like embodied carbon saved. It's a no-brainer. Let's immediately in our program make sure that we put into our project plan to get that into the checklist, because really it doesn't take that much effort and time. It makes the developer call up the relocation company and to come out and do a site check. These are all part of a program that we should be doing for the end goal of diverting construction demolition material produced in Nanaimo from landfill and to extract the highest value possible of the material to develop economic opportunities. That's what I would like to see. And so if this is what the direction and the option that we're given now with option 1, I'm 100% supportive of it. And speaking to the permitting times, I hate hearing that our permitting times are affecting the ambition of our development community to jump on board a project like that, because it's true. Our permitting times are too long, and we need to be putting effort into it and project planning to get it down and efficient, so that it's not even a consideration when we're having an environmental project like this that's a no-brainer to put it into play. And so I know the conversation on permitting time is coming and more resources that we could put to like have a greater effort on that, but I wouldn't like them to be sort of like packed in together because, yeah, thank you.
Councillor Thorpe.
Very briefly, thank you, Chair, very much. I want to thank Councillor Hemmons for the question she asked and the clarification that we got from staff on that, especially from Mr. Lindsay, who I think has identified clearly that our decision point today is, do we want to go down the path of regulation or focus more on the path of education? And I'm firmly convinced that at this stage of the game, education would be more beneficial to us and to our citizens, less costly, quite realistically, and also acknowledges the challenges that stakeholders have already identified in this entire process. So I'm still not convinced that option one is the way to go. I would much prefer a motion that directs staff to focus on an educational awareness campaign. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Hemmons?
Thank you, Chair.
Pardon me.
Thank you. Just before the vote, I'm going to indicate that I'm not going to support. I do believe a path of education is the best path forward. However, I would love to reconsider this after we do have that conversation about building permit times. I agree with Councillor Gessebach. We should be considering any impact on the development community as a whole. So I loved the argument of Councillor Manley. You know, the landfill costs are significant, and we need to weigh that in as well. But just given what I've heard today, I'm inclined to not support this. Thank you.
Thank you. And speaking for myself, I think that education is always important, but we're talking about industry here, and I think regulation is what needs to apply to industry, and I'd be interested in both carrots and sticks. Obviously, carrots are better, but sticks are effective when people are resistant and sick of carrots. And I totally acknowledge that staff and resources are finite, but at the same time, our landfill space and building resources are finite, along with the time to act like we're in a climate crisis and walk the talk on doing our part as far as making Nanaimo and life on the island more sustainable. So I was hoping that we would be able to progress with doing a bit more consultation and figuring out what a feasible bylaw would actually look like. I think that's a really important next step in this conversation, and you know, if it kind of peters off at this stage, I think that's a really missed opportunity, but perhaps we can revisit it when we talk about building permits and make sure that it's everything is working together. So with that, I will call for a vote on the motion on the floor. All in favor? And those opposed? Opposed, we have Mayor Krogh, Councillor Hemmons, Councillor Thorpe, and Councillor Perino, and that motion fails. I will note that we are well past our break time, but we're losing Councillor Thorpe at 3:30. So if someone would like to put an alternate motion on the floor for the first part, or there's also a building bylaw amendment motion that could be entertained. Anyone? Councillor Manley.
I'd like to move the building bylaw amendment.
That's option one?
Yep.
Okay, seconded by Councillor Hemmons. Any discussion? All in favor? That carries unanimously. Thank you. And with that, we will take our recess, and I'll see you back here at 3:30. Thanks, everyone. So next up, under city plan, we have a city plan review. Mr. Holm, you're introducing this today?
Thank you. Yes, very briefly, I'll actually turn it over to Ms. Brinkman. This is an important work plan item in the community planning section, and Ms. Brinkman's leading that, and we'll explain where we're at with that. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Holm, and good afternoon. There is a PowerPoint. Thank you. Great. So in January of this year, I presented a staff report outlining the project to complete a review of city plan, and this presentation is to provide an update on that project. And so the reason we needed to complete a review was to ensure that we meet Local Government Act requirements to accommodate anticipated housing need in accordance with our 2024 Housing Needs Report. Also, this is an opportunity to reconcile city plan policy related to transit-oriented areas, also required by the Local Government Act. And since we are doing the review, this is an opportunity to do some housekeeping amendments to the plan. So in the Local Government Act, the province indicates that we are to have policy in the plan to support 7 categories of housing need. So a comprehensive review was completed, and the conclusion is that City Plan already has many policies to address all 7 categories of housing need. And so we're meeting the provincial requirements in that regard. We also have actions in place to address all 7 categories of housing need, and staff are currently working to implement these actions. Also, the Local Government Act states the official community plan should have sufficient land designated to allow for the 20 years of housing need. And so we completed a review of the future land use designations. And in fact, there is a potential for approximately 147,000 housing units already in city plan. So to summarize, the Housing Needs Report states that in 20 years, so from 2021 to 2041, we need 23,776 housing units. The city plan future land use designations allow for 147,000 units approximately, so we're good there. Also, our current zoning bylaw has land pre-zoned for more than 65,000 housing units in the residential zones. So what we found was that we have actually no required amendments to city plan to meet that Local Government Act requirement, so we're in good shape. Now, earlier this year, Council passed a motion to add a policy to city plan to ensure supportive housing is more evenly distributed throughout the city. And so this is a great time to introduce that policy into city plan. I would like to mention, though, that staff have been working to encourage BC Housing to find sites and construct supportive housing in the north end of the city. And to date, these sites have not come to fruition, so it is something we are all working towards, but this policy can help strengthen that goal. So with regard to transit-oriented areas, so as required by the province, Council adopted the Transit-Oriented Area Designation Bylaw in June 2024, which established an area within 400-meter radius around the Woodgrove Country Club and Vancouver Island University bus exchanges as TOAs, allowing greater residential density in these areas. City Plan also designates the Woodgrove Country Club and VIU areas as secondary urban centers, that a land use designation that supports the highest density of residential use. However, the specified transit-oriented area is somewhat larger than some of our secondary urban centers in the 3. And so to avoid conflicting policy regarding density and building height in these areas, we're recommending this clarifying policy just to give a bit more clear direction for those parcels that are in the TOA but not in the secondary urban center. So this approach is kind of a middle ground approach because it respects the very intentional planning we did for city plan, but also respects the province's requirement for transit-oriented areas. So the proposed housekeeping amendments and the rationale for each of them are outlined in the table in attachment E. And in summary, there's updates proposed to the figures, maps, and policies in the plan. And these are to correct errors, to incorporate new information, and to provide clarity for some of the policies. So if Council gives direction to proceed, the proposed amendments will be set out in a city plan amending bylaw with maps. And I'd be happy to answer any questions about the proposed housekeeping amendments in attachment E. So the next steps proposed would be this summer to complete referrals. Because it's an official community plan amendment, there's rigorous referrals to agencies and adjacent governments required. So we will start that with the Ministry of Transportation, Regional District of Nanaimo, Nanaimo First Nation. And then in the fall, we hope to present the draft amending bylaw to council if direction is given for first and second reading. Following that would be a public hearing, and then the final referrals as required by the Local Government Act. And then later in the winter, early winter, would be consideration of adopting city plan amending bylaw. So happy to take any questions.
Not seeing any questions. So, Councillor Hemmons moves the recommendation, option 1 and 2.
Yes.
Seconded by Mayor Croak. Councillor Hemmons?
Thank you.
Oh, pardon me.
Thank you, Chair. So this is all grouped together. Great, support it all. I do want to acknowledge as the person who brought forward the motion around distribution of supportive housing units, I think what I was looking for was a policy, like this is what we intend to do, this is how we intend to implement it, this is how we're going to measure it, this is when we're going to review the policy. However, I understand city plan is more, and my sense of it is always that it's an indices of policy statements, and this fits. My sense of this is this elevates this in the political realm and allows decision makers to work with policy when we're working with BC Housing. I do want to acknowledge that the North End sites have not been realized. Council contemplates supportive housing sites all over the city. Recently, it's just been that the South End and the Central City sites have been faster off the ground, so it really feels like concentration absolutely is happening. But I say this because I think there was a sense maybe in the community that this would mean that we would never build, there would be some discussion of the work that Ms. Wood is doing around the GIS mapping and how a neighborhood can contain supportive housing, what is the ratio of non-supportive housing to supportive housing, those sorts of decision points. So I'm just flagging that as, I think that's where I was hoping to go. However, I understand that this is how city plan works and that this is just elevating it in the political realm. So that was very long-winded and a bit rambly, but thank you, I support this.
All in favor? Motion carries unanimously. Thank you, Council. And thank you for the presentation, Ms. Brinkman. Next up is our parking review and bylaw update midway through this project, to be introduced by Bill Sims, our General Manager of Engineering and Public Works.
Thanks, Chair. I'd like to introduce Fraser Maude, the city's transportation engineer, and Dan Casey from Urban Systems, who's been heading up the project. You received a presentation from Mr. Casey earlier in the year. Normally, Mr. Rose would be here in front of you as well. And we have Lane Rowett, whom you know, and Peyton Carter is a planner with Development Services. So briefly, we were hitting you with a 1-2 punch today on the non-controversial subject of parking. It's just a reflection that two things that are the most important in the citizen's mind, at least my own observation, is parking and garbage. So if we can't get those ones right, we're in trouble. So I'll pass it to Mr. Maude to introduce the subject, and then we'll carry on. Thank you.
Great, thank you very much. That was the brunt of it. We had the presentation in December 9th introducing this project, aligned with many OCP and IAP goals, or policies, to review how we're providing parking on both development as well as publicly. Yeah, we have Mr. Casey providing an update. We've been doing some consultation and review of alternatives, and we have some preliminary recommendations. Yeah. So.
Great, thank you, everyone. So, yeah, like was said, my name's Dan Casey. I'm here with Urban Systems, and we've been brought on board to support the city through the citywide parking review and bylaw update. I'm noticing that some of my fonts on the screen look a little different here than what's on my printout, so I'll narrate pretty closely if it's helpful, just to make sure all the information's conveyed. So my hope today has got about 15 minutes worth of material that the intent is to kind of update on the work we've been up to over the last 6 or so months. Also we're at the point in the process where we've got some sort of key themes that are emerging. I do want to, part of our goal is to come back in the fall with some more detailed recommendations, but we're viewing this as an opportunity to get some of the key themes in front of members of council and hopefully gain sort of a level of support and comfort with what's being shown, but also have a discussion around areas where there might be a lack of comfort and we're seeing issues. So that's my hope for the session for today. So an overview of what we're up to. This is recap on the GPC meeting from mid-December of late 2024. This process has really been carried out to align parking regulation and really more broadly mobility regulation with key policy directions, primarily from City Plan. There have been changes at the provincial level in terms of the legislation that guides regulation that municipalities put in place. And so while some of the sort of requisite changes have been made on that front, there is also some supporting areas that we see where we can, again, better align some of the response to the provincial legislation with the city's own policy directives. And then lastly, parking, kind of some jokes a few minutes ago, parking is a broad-ranging subject matter. And so we do think there's some opportunity through parking-related regulation that we can actually sort of start to reach some broader city policy objectives. So not strictly parking itself, but areas around housing affordability, environmental sustainability, health and well-being, et cetera. And so I want to highlight some of those opportunities as well. And so I think key outcomes here, again, parking is broad, but we're meant to bring this back down to a more tangible, how can we make change in regulation so that the types of development and city activities in future are better aligned with some of these overall objectives. And so the key document we'll be looking through is specific changes to the off-street parking regulations bylaw, but also traffic and highways regulation bylaw, crossing control bylaw as well. We're undertaking, loosely speaking, a 4-stage process. The first stage is around background review and issue identification. That sort of culminated in the presentation to GPC in December of 2024. We've been working through the winter and fall and spring on community outreach and engagement, as well as identifying options. We're here today sort of at the, we'll call it the logical conclusion of that second phase of work, and we've really looking through late summer and into the fall to start detailing out our recommendations for this work. That would be section or phase 3, and then phase 4 is around implementation. So physically taking the recommendations that emerge from this work and embedding them as change in regulation moving forward from there. So we completed community engagement through the winter into the spring, really focused in March and April. 3 key activities were undertaken. One is a project webpage that is still live today, and so that was actually put in place back in fall 2024 to sort of track progress, post deliverables that sort of emerged through this work, and let members of the community know their opportunities and timing for engagement. We hosted a series of focused interest holder conversations. The idea there was to reach out with community groups, community interests that have either a specific stake in parking regulation, so groups like representatives of the land development industry, folks from your accessibility community, even like the taxi industry, people we know have a real stake, and also information that's valuable to the work that we're doing here. So those conversations happened largely through April. And we also had a community survey that was administered over the period of about a month, a number of questions related to sort of more broadly mobility as well as specific to parking regulation. And the outcomes from that survey, the summary is actually contained in the report that's appended to the agenda package for today. We had a total of 362 responses to that survey. And so by no means an exhaustive summary of takeaways here, but a few sort of salient points that came from both the conversations and the survey. And more detailed takeaways, again, are contained in the agenda package. But number one was that we saw pretty loud and clear through these survey takeaways, and I think we've seen this a little bit in past when considering vehicle ownership information, is that there's a lower rate of vehicle ownership, and as a result, a lower rate of parking demand that we're seeing in and around the downtown area. And so we take that at sort of a surface level, but we start thinking also about how it reflects some of the directions that are laid out in city plan. We're starting to see in action some of what city plan sees in future for other urban centers in and around the downtown. So maybe an indication that it's, to an extent, it's working. Number two here, specifically in conversation with the development industry, is that parking's expensive. Building parking is expensive. And so we want to keep this in mind as we contemplate change to regulation, is there are knock-on effects from the cost of having to build parking. And so I don't know if having is the right word there or choosing to, but that the cost is real, and it can be borne through the people who are either buying those units or leasing or renting the space. And I think lastly, and maybe sort of in a more positive light, is that we actually did see, especially through our community resident survey, a great deal of support for alternatives to owning and operating a private vehicle. So support for active transportation, support for public transit, which is encouraging. So I guess turning the corner just a little bit in terms of where we see this work going. Before I sort of get into what we've called these preliminary directions or sort of key thematic areas, we wanted to kind of really isolate a series of guiding principles. And so in a way, these have almost been like they're really a reflection of the policy the city already has in place, but also have become very clear as we dig in and start to understand where the meaningful change might occur here. And so one, this exercise really is guided by your established city policies, and most notably in city plan. A lot of what I'm going to talk to for the next little bit here really is the practical application at a regulatory level of policies that are already in place. And so we're not coming here sort of inventing these, we'll say. They're the logical next step of policy that's already in place. I think item 2 here is a phrase we've been using a lot over the course of this process, which is complete mobility. And so what we mean by that is that we are trying to provide residents and visitors in all parts of the city with complete mobility opportunities. That might look different in outlying areas of the city where vehicle dependency will probably remain sort of more front and center than it might in some of the more urban spaces where complete mobility might mean less reliance on vehicle and more of an appetite and uptake on supporting opportunities. And then lastly is a lot of this work is setting regulation that will guide development, that will result in buildings and sites that will be in place for a period of time into the future. And so we do want to make sure that the regulations that emerge from this don't necessarily relate to how things were built in past, or doesn't necessarily rely on data information from the past, that it's forward-looking and it's going to result in buildings that sort of are in keeping with where city plan and supporting documents see the city going in future. So we thought those were important. While quite high level, they're important. Okay, so in terms of preliminary directions, I'm gonna introduce about, I think it's 5 or 6 sort of key thematic areas, and my hope is that the group either sort of once we've sort of delivered these, is there's a level of comfort among the group that yes, this all seems to be heading in a good direction, and that would be an excellent outcome. Or there's items you want to pick up on and discuss and make sure we are comfortable that we're heading in the right direction with this work. So I think the first one here, the preliminary direction really is that we want to adjust parking requirements in primary and secondary urban centers to support desired land use and transportation options, primarily as envisioned through city plans. So the visual that's on the screen in front of us is the future land use designations map from city plan. It isolates downtown as a primary urban center and 6 supporting secondary urban centers. What we are highlighting to date is the opportunity, I guess 3 opportunities that really relate to this piece on vehicle parking supply rate and the relationship to the land use designations from city plan. So one, again, specific to primary and secondary urban centers, is the potential removal of minimum parking supply requirements that would enable lower parked or zero parked projects in these areas, not citywide, but specific to the primary and secondary urban centers. Action has been taken toward that in your downtown, as well as through the TOA legislation in 3 of the secondary urban centers. What's being identified here is extend that to each of the secondary urban centers and make sure that the geographic alignment is to city plan and not necessarily to the provincially legislated TOAs. So that's item 1. Item 2 relates to actually installing a parking maximum. So where the parking minimums provide basically the floor or the bottom end of what level of parking provision might occur, a maximum operates at the upper end, and again, specific to primary and secondary urban centers, which city plan talks at length about the importance of density, mixed uses, providing people and close access to transportation options. The idea of a maximum specific to these centers would be to ensure that we don't see an oversupply, and that the approach to parking that's provided in future in these areas is consistent with that envisioned future per city plan. And then third and lastly, consideration around the city's cash in lieu of parking policy. And so in our view, cash in lieu would be most applicable in primary and secondary urban centers. In the absence of a minimum parking requirement in these areas, there's no longer the ability to levy cash in lieu. There is no minimum. There's nothing to provide cash in lieu of. And so the approach now that's being suggested is, instead of this cash in lieu alternative, it's an as-of-right based system where we set the supply rates where they ought to be. We set supporting requirements for the types of things we might have previously sought through cash in lieu, but it's done as of right without sort of this secondary stream. So that's a suggestion that's being brought forward as well. Okay, so moving on to another preliminary direction. This one is around providing support for increased transit ridership in what we've sort of flagged here as transit adjacent lands, which are those lands that are nearby the identified bus rapid transit and bus frequent transit corridors, again, identified in city plan. So there's a visual on the screen in front of us, which shows first in purple the 7, or the primary urban center plus 6 secondary urban centers, where I already spoke about what the new approach to parking supply requirements might be. Then highlighted in the dark blue are parcels that, so outside of the identified centers, parcels that are within 200 meters of the BRT, of the bus rapid transit identified corridor. And then parcels in the lighter blue, which are within 200 meters of the BFT corridors. This is meant as a demonstration of what the geographic coverage of the approach that I'm about to talk about would take in. So by no means citywide, but with great potential to reinforce the city's objectives around both increasing ridership and increasing service levels along defined corridors. So two key areas where we see regulation can help achieve this. One is entertaining reduced, so not eliminating, but entertaining reduced minimum parking supply requirements where proximate to either BRT corridors and or BFT corridors. And there's probably conversation around what's an appropriate reduction, but the idea is the intent is reduced reliance on vehicle ownership and private vehicles in these areas, and an increased attractiveness and uptake of people choosing to use public transit. And so setting minimum parking supply requirements to match. And then item 2 here is allowing for that reduction in the minimum parking supply requirement, but at the same time increasing requirements for transit supports through transportation demand management. So that could take the form of requirements to offset the cost of accessing public transit, so financial support for people who live within these areas and want to access transit, as well as the potential for contribution toward transit infrastructure, bus stops, or potentially priority treatments over time as well. So this idea that we're going to sort of change the typical approach where sites are close to higher order transit to see less parking, less reliance on parking, and increased requirement around supporting more people accessing transit. So the next item is around the introduction of new and or increased requirements for sustainable transportation facilities and sustainable transportation program supports in line with the city's mobility objectives. And so there's a handful of opportunities here. And I'm going to narrate pretty closely here because the words are actually trickling off the bottom of the screen in front of us. So the first item that's highlighted is an increase for bike parking requirements, very specifically in urban centers. We do believe that, similar to the transit item, we do believe that as parking requirements start to drop down in some of these specified areas, it is important that we do see an appropriate increase in requirements for things like bike parking. So that's one item coming forward. A couple other related items. One would be around enhanced bicycle parking design requirements. So not just the supply of the bike parking stalls, but making sure they're done so in a way that's high quality and continues to be usable. Especially now that we have a better understanding of where non-conventional bicycle types are going, making sure that we have design requirements and make sure we have stalls that are useful to people with new types of bikes that we didn't previously contemplate. And then the second item there, more specific to commute destinations, things like office buildings or retail or institutional uses, would be introducing requirements. So bike parking would be in place, but it'd be the supports around things like access to a locker and change room or a shower, things that break down that barrier that some people might not be willing to ride their bike to work because of the lack of these facilities. Starting to introduce that on sites where it's appropriate and where of a scale where it's a sort of a reasonable ask. This is something that only a select number of municipalities in the province have done, and some, but not many. And this would put the city a little more out in front, we'll say, on in terms of innovation on this item. Talked a little bit about this next item already, which really is this idea that if we're going to pull back on the requirements around vehicular parking in urban centers specifically, we feel it's appropriate to prop up the requirement for supporting transportation demand management opportunities. And then lastly and related is where the focus of a lot of this recalibration of how mobility is supplied has been on urban centers. We still do think there's the opportunity throughout the rest of the city where, access to higher order transit might not be at the same level it is in centers or on corridors, or the level of AT, active transportation provision, might not be to the same extent as well. There could and should be the opportunity, sort of on an incentive-based system, that sites may entertain reduced parking supply to an extent with transportation demand management, with supports for walking, cycling, transit, or otherwise being put in place to offset the parking that's not being provided. And so where the approach in urban centers, we feel it's appropriate here to move to an as-of-right based system. Parking is reduced, transportation demand management is increased. We think in the other areas where appropriate, a incentive-based approach would work well, where applicant and staff work to identify opportunities where these options might be available and reduced parking might be appropriate. Next one is relates to some more sort of unique and specific parking needs throughout the city. We want to continue to make sure that the city is out in front on tailoring regulation to changing needs of the community. So a few areas we see this being applicable. One is around accessible parking design and provision. The city already has requirements for accessible parking in place, but we want to be very, very careful and clear that as minimum parking supply rates for conventional vehicle parking supply are being altered and reduced in certain areas, that the intent is that would not apply to reductions in accessible parking supply as well. So we need to be very conscious and careful about how we go about doing that to make sure that doesn't occur. There's also been some more sort of best practice and innovative thinking around accessible parking supply design requirements. And so we have some opportunities we think we can improve on the approach to accessible parking design in the city that we'd like to bring forward. Another item here is around loading and delivery. Conventionally, loading requirements have related to large stalls for large delivery vehicles. More and more in this community and others, we're seeing a need to provide very specifically for more conventional sized delivery vehicles, e-commerce, meal delivery, et cetera. Do that in a deliberate way, but the types of stalls that have been provided as loading in past are not what these uses need. So we want to bake in something very specific to adapt to and accommodate for some of these newer delivery needs. Another area here is around mobility scooter parking. And so there are select land uses where we know there's a demand and a need to accommodate dedicated space and charging for mobility scooters. We want to bring forward opportunities for select land uses to include these items in regulation. And then lastly, we're going through a bit of a more detailed and focused exercise on looking at the entire, there's a data table that spans over 2 pages in regulation on minimum parking supply requirements for all sorts of land uses. So where a lot of the focus here has been on core uses around multifamily residential and maybe some of the bigger office type uses, we're looking more comprehensively also just to make sure that the city's supply requirements both line up sort of with what we're seeing in other communities and to learn from how well they've been operating here when applied. So a more focused and detailed exercise there. And I think lastly, where much of the focus is around development regulation, there's also an acknowledgement that specifically in urban centers and in proximity to some of the higher order transit corridors, what's being brought forward here represents some pretty significant change. And so we want to look at the city's approach to managing public parking assets, on-street parking, parkades, parking lots, to make sure that we remain proactive in knowing that over time, and it will take time, but as these regulations are applied and new buildings are built, the pressures and the sort of needs of residents, of employees, of business owners on public parking resources is going to start to change. And so we want to lay out a bit of a program that, again, over time, but starts to recalibrate how the city might think about its own public parking resource. So part of that is creating a framework that supports decision making. A lot of this is we don't know yet what those pressures are going to be, but we want to have a framework criteria in place that allows the right decision to be made when the time comes. And data collection, we want to continue to monitor. We know the city's begun to develop a comprehensive inventory. We want to monitor how those resources are being used and have a system in place that when we need to make decisions, we have the information available on hand to allow for that. So I guess to wrap up, we are seeking confirmation from council members via the GPC to advance some of the preliminary directions that have been brought forward today and are in the documentation in the agenda package. Additional detail will be forthcoming, so for those that advance, we'll be developing quite detailed recommendations on how those look or could look in terms of changes in regulation. We're anticipating being back at a fall meeting of GPC to present back on that. And subject to sort of comfort in moving forward, the physical updates to regulation would be made. So with that, I'll thank you. Very happy to engage in any dialogue or answer any questions.
Mayor Krogh.
Thank you very much, Chair, and for what it's worth, I'm pleased with what I saw today and heard, so thank you.
Good.
Councillor Manley.
Thank you, Chair. Yeah, thank you for the report. It's very comprehensive, and I like what I'm seeing here too. I'm just wondering about engagement, because I guess, you know, no matter what you do, people are self-selecting to engage in this publicly, because you see most of the respondents are age 35 or older. 82% of the respondents are 35 or older. The average, I think it was more than 50% of people, 53% of the respondents indicated the household income of $100,000, but I don't think our mean income in Nanaimo was anywhere near that. I think it's under 70,000 or something, right? So I'm just, and I know like people that don't drive probably wouldn't be interested in parking, but these kind of decisions and discussions actually impact their lives, right? So if you're looking for affordable housing, you don't drive, you want an apartment where you're not paying for a parking space, you may not be engaging. And I'm just curious about how we can reach the broader community a little bit more, because it seems like it's, you know, people that have selected themselves, 2-car families, people with that higher average income and older age range.
Yep. Yeah, through the chair, I think that's a really good point, or a really good comment. We've done these sorts of reviews in a handful of other communities. We do tend to find, so the response rate here to the survey was 360 something responses. By no means is that we're not treating that as representative of the entire community by any means. We have done this in other places. The uptake is often relatively low. I think when you get into dialogue around things like time limitations or priced parking, or that tends to generate a lot of interest in the subject matter. I think development regulations are a little bit tougher to they're not quite as tangible because they're applied as applications come forward. And so I would say sort of the rate of participation here is not out of line with what we've seen elsewhere. I think it's our job and working with staff to make sure that we sort of treat that for what it is. It's a nice indication of where the community's at. It did provide us some really nice takeaways in certain areas, but we're resisting the urge to treat it as comprehensive.
Okay. Yeah, thanks. I think it's going in a good direction, so I'm pleased to see it. Thank you.
Chair, if I just can add a little bit to what Mr. Casey said, is that he's indicated that the stuff we heard was not necessarily what you'd expect, or maybe, you know, the demographic was a little different. But we certainly treat the Reimagine process as very comprehensive because of the level of broad community engagement, and that informed many of the foundational policies around parking and mobility within, and land use for that matter, within city plan. So that's where we're taking most of the cue from. We're building from that point of view rather than a separate engagement. But this is also, you know, fulfilling our needs or obligations to engage throughout the project.
Yeah, continuing engagement's really important, but yeah, city plan actually lines out a lot of these ideas, so thanks.
Councillor Perino.
Thank you, Chair. And through you, just a couple of comments. When, under your preliminary directions, introduce new or increased requirements for sustainable transportation facilities to support the city's mobility objectives. So you talk a little bit about bike parking and that. And the one concern that we've brought up several times at this table, and I just wanted to put it into your head, is I'm not gonna ride a $3,500 bike if I can't park it safely and securely. You know, I'm not gonna stop and go into a store. So that's a concern that, you know, as you've talked about this end of trip facilities, they have to be secure. That's by far the most important part for mobility. So I just wanted to leave that with you. And the next things too is there's 2 times in your life that are really difficult to not have a car. And it's when you've got 1 or 2 or 3 children and you're trying to buy groceries or, you know, the activities that a family has. So, you know, I'm not going to shop if I can't get to a place that has parking available, if I've got young children that I have to cart around. And I sometimes think, you know, we need to remember that portion. And the other part is that in this province, 21% of all the citizens are over the age of 65. In this region, it's 30% are over the age of 65. And these people are living longer and longer, thank goodness. But they need to drive because they can't walk and they can't bike, and it's difficult to manage a bus. So that's a concern. You know, when we're looking at this, if they can't get to a store, they're not going to be able to shop. So I'm worried about the business end too. So just that. Having said that, I thought this was an excellent document. I really appreciate the presentation, and yeah, we'll see where it goes. Thank you.
Councillor Gesselbrecht.
Thanks, Chair, through you. Thanks for the report. I think there's, I like a lot of the recommendations. The same thought did come across when I looked at the engagement. I was like, oh, that's a lot of people from quite a high income bracket, and yeah, I think the average in Nanaimo was $68,000. So yeah, hopefully that didn't bias too much sort of the recommendations. The one that I thought maybe could be a little bit more forward-moving was, I think, VPS 3, the reduced parking for multifamily near BRT and frequent transit. In the report, I think there's options one for the tying further reductions to transportation demand management. I think that we should do that, absolutely. I mean, if they're putting in elements for alternatives into the development, then they should have more reduced parking. That's the direction we're moving, especially in these zones where there's frequent transit. But I'd almost go, and I think we should go beyond that and just eliminate the parking minimums there entirely. I think these are on spots with frequent transit, and they are set up to not be as reliant on vehicles. And just looking at the increased evidence from other, I mean, there's countless counties and cities and I think maybe even countries that have eliminated parking minimums, and there hasn't really been ill effect. I think the market and the developers and the banks are going to be sure that whatever they're building is going to be marketable and utilized, and that they will make the determination, and with a lot more rigor than we could devise as a regulatory body. And so I think that we should just go for like the first two is just eliminate the parking minimums entirely there, and just do it like the nodes and the other two spots. So that would be my suggestion, is go to eliminating the parking minimums for that, or maybe it's VPS 3, and if not, at the minimum, at least tie further reductions to transportation demand management. Thanks. Great report.
Thank you. So that was just a report for information, so if everyone's had a chance to weigh in, then, oh, of course, sorry, Councillor Hammonds.
No, that's okay.
Oh,
I was late.
just let me.
There we go, done. Thank you for the report, comprehensive. I support the trajectory that we're going in. My only curiosity was, so TDM1 in urban centers and transit adjacent lands require baseline TDM measures be provided by developments of a defined size or type. That makes sense. So we're going to ask development to ensure that we have TDM measures in place. And then further down, we're potentially going to update and adjust existing citywide short and long-term bicycle parking supply requirements. So I guess my question is, we're updating it, so we think we understand bicycle parking supply requirements, and are they not being met, and that's why we need to reevaluate? Just my thinking on this one is, we kind of know where the bikes are going. We know that they're going into urban centers. They need places to park. Do we need a strategy, and do we need to update it to get that information? And then a piece just about the design of the bicycle parking, and if we already have something in place, do we have standards and we're just adjusting them, or are we going to say when we're asking developers to put in bicycle parking, they must conform to these sorts of design requirements, et cetera? That was vague.
So I think really, really good comments, and I think maybe the distinction there is where we're focusing energy so far on this is really that supporting that shift specifically in the primary and secondary urban centers. And so not necessarily seeing any issue or challenge with supply rates for bike parking citywide at the moment. But where we see this all going is in those centers in particular is a decreased reliance on vehicles and an increased reliance on sustainable options, one of which, a key one, would be cycling. And so that's where we see the potential sort of recalibration of bike parking requirement rates is in the urban centers primarily. And then I think on the question that was, or the comment baked in there around design requirements is the types of bicycles on the road just continue, road and trails, continues to change. And so we want to make sure that things like cargo bikes or larger e-bikes, they're properly accommodated in these facilities, especially the comment around security and just the typical cost of a typical bike is that much higher these days than it was in past. We want to make sure that's well done. We want to make sure even just simple things like the doorways that might be used to access these facilities or the corridors that are used to maneuver what are now commonly larger bikes through these facilities are done in a way that they're going to work. They're going to future-proof for the kinds of bikes we're going to see on the road and trails in future. So it's those sorts of things. Yeah.
Great, thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you. And yeah, just speaking for myself, I'm really happy to see what the preliminary directions are, and I'm on board with that. So looking forward to next steps on this. Thank you very much. And that brings us to our final item today, a review of our parking rates and penalties, to be introduced by Bill Sims. Okay.
Sounds good, thank you. So obviously related to the previous item, the report that we have today, I don't have any slides, so I'll just kind of walk through some of the highlights of it. I think it came about because we were working on this review, and we didn't specifically have a review of the rates and fines in the scope of this work. So we did a bit of digging and kind of came up with some background information to provide some context, and then looking for direction, recommendation to council to direct us to incorporate that essentially, to do that more detailed review into our rates. So yeah, talking to the report, obviously the rates that we have for our parking are they can be very important to how it actually gets utilized, where people choose to park, and then the fines, extremely important in terms of discouraging unwanted behavior, and what those rates are will impact that. So the first main area that we went into, just doing some review, was how much monitoring, providing personal vehicle storage is costing the city. So we did some analysis, worked with finance. I will beg their forgiveness if I'm using any of these technical words wrong on the finance side, but we looked at how much revenue is collected from those fines and those rates compared to the costs that we're putting to operating parking, both parkades, surface parking, and curbside. And looking at the last 3 years, we kind of averaged that we are operating with a surplus on just that operating side of about $447,000, which goes into the parking reserve. But we also incorporated all of the project costs that are planned for the next 10 years in our budget cycle, and then averaged that just over that 10-year period to give $1.17 million every year, which is obviously more than 447. So looking at the last 3 years again, we are essentially, again, this is where they'll probably have a different interpretation, but I would use subsidizing parking by about $718,000 per year. And that's coming from other sources, so property taxes, other reserves, and other sources. And I would also note that in that analysis, it was a little difficult to tease out, so we didn't include just the road maintenance of it. So that's about $2.7 million per year, but that includes the entire roads, not just the parking lane, which is where it got complicated. So we didn't do that and just had it as that asterisk. And then the other big piece is the ultimate replacement cost of our parkade structures. That's not in there. All of those project costs over the next 10 years are just to keep them going, essentially. So that was kind of one major area we looked at. Obviously, city services are not intended to be a cost recovery, so just kind of putting that in there. The other main area we looked at was comparisons to other municipalities in BC to see where we kind of sit. So that's the other table in the report there. Generally speaking, we're not wildly out over or under, but a few notes that we kind of observed in going through that. Looking at just the on-street parking rates, we have a very kind of flat rate that applies for any period of time, any period of the day, compared to some of the other municipalities we looked at. They do kind of change the rate as time, like if on the third hour it kind of goes up if you're sitting in the same spot for a longer period of time, and then also they change the rates again depending on the time of day to identify when that peak demand is, to make sure that parking turnover is happening so that a car isn't just parked there, which can have an economic impact if businesses aren't accessible because people are parking there longer than maybe makes sense otherwise. One of the other main things, and acknowledging that Victoria is a very different parking context and context generally, we did notice that they don't actually have monthly parking permits in their parkades, and we didn't contact them, but in the literature, speaking to some of the points about mode shift and encouraging more active transportation, there's kind of monthly passes do sometimes be seen as a sunk cost. So if you're deciding if you're going to drive that morning or bike that morning, if you've already paid for the parking, that kind of enters into it. So that's just one other layer of some of the sophistication that goes into some of their areas. And then, one of the other notes that came up was just even comparing to VIU. They have a 325 per hour. So if we're looking at kind of how much we're charging, then yeah, we're out from some of the local entities as well. So obviously not a very comprehensive deep dive. Essentially the purpose of this report is just to highlight a few points and then ask the question of do you want us to be doing that deeper dive, and then incorporating that. It'll be linked to the broader parking project that's going on right now. So yeah, any questions as well, obviously?
Councillor Hemmons.
Thank you, Chair. Given that in the report it says it's identified that Nanaimo's rates generally fall within the range of rates and fines charged by similar municipalities, I'm always happy to have staff go do a deeper dive and figure out where we're at, but I feel like that gives us our answer, and so I'm a little worried about sending staff off to do work that we already have an answer to.
Yeah, so I think that's kind of speaking to the dollar values that are there. Some of the other pieces that go around it are those levels of sophistication to have that time of day or rates changing depending on the duration of a stay. So yeah, so that's kind of some of those aspects. Yes, we're not wildly out of tune just at the dollar value, but in terms of how we manage and best utilize the available parking space, there are tools that we could add to our tool belt that would help us just dial that in a bit more precisely, I guess. Yeah.
Okay, thank you. That makes sense to me. And one more, if I may. Forgive me, this is me, but the math is just not mathing on the project expenditure. So you're telling me that over the last 3 years, we've had about $450,000 surplus, and we've put that into the reserves. However, when we look at the project expenditures over the next 10 years, we're going to be in deficit. So we're just building more? Like, so we've gone from a surplus to a deficit. And if you could just explain that again, I would appreciate it.
Yes, that's where the finance language, I think, is particular. So that's the surplus there is just kind of on the operating side. And if you do look, like the project expenditures that are in that table, 2022, the actual project expenditures are about 37,000, and then 677 in 2023. So that's essentially the difference of those bigger projects that need to be done. The surplus is strictly for the operating, so for kind of staffing and bylaw enforcement. Comparing that expense versus the revenue, not incorporating the project costs, if that makes sense.
Sort of.
Sorry.
No, it's okay, it's me. What's the bump from 2022, we spent 36,000, in 2023, we spent 675,000? What did we do?
I didn't get into the specific project list, so I'm not certain. I don't know.
I don't know that I need a specific project list, but just that's a significant jump. If there's any clarification, I would appreciate it.
Sure, through the chair, I would say that those are project-specific dollar values in a given year. Like, so we would plan to do, let's say, a parquet membrane replacement as an example, or some fire suppression upgrades, and that might be one. And then in 2022, we didn't do anything for whatever reason. It was just not timely. It wasn't planned for, or whatever. Or we built the project plan over a period of time.
So thank you. If I may, would it be accurate to say that 2022 is the anomaly rather than 2023? Right. Okay, thank you.
Councillor Manley.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you for the presentation. I'm going to assume, based on the emails that we received, that we don't have any provisions for on-street parking for residential areas for people to stay longer than the 2-hour minimums or whatever. And I'm curious about whether the city has considered having a parking pass for residents only that somebody would pay for in a residential area. Not talking about commercial areas, because we want that parking turnover for businesses, but have we considered doing something like that for residents only parking, like where there's I know in other cities, Victoria, Vancouver, you go and it says 2-hour minimum, residents accepted, and I'm sure people are paying for those passes, and I'm curious about whether we've looked into doing that here.
Yeah, fair. So we do have an existing program that's kind of, as I understand it, this preceded my time at the city, is from before, where local residents could submit an application, and they were, there's no permits involved, as I understand it. It's just your license plate is registered. That's not currently something that we're kind of looking to continue expanding on, but obviously if there's direction that's the priority. We do also have some signage throughout the city that includes that resident exempt little note related to that, but that isn't, those signs in some areas, there's not sort of a license plate registry in the same way. As I understand it, if you get a ticket, you can challenge it, and then it's kind of done that way, which is a bit admittedly circuitous. Yeah.
Okay, yeah, that's seems like a little more of an annoying route. Get your ticket and then challenge it. So yeah, I wonder whether we want to consider that. And then also the other thing that's come up is just with some people getting tickets and saying that other communities like Berkeley or Vancouver have like lower ticket limit, like a warning ticket. You get ticketed again, your license plate pops up again, you get a higher fine. And I don't know whether that's something we want to consider or not. And I'm curious just about the other communities where the differential in the fines are. Some of them have quite a differential in the amounts for fines, and whether that's based on the area of town, or whether, like, how is that determined, what the amount of the fine is?
I'll speak to that latter part briefly. We were trying to simplify a wide range of sins. So, there's all sorts of different ways you can have a parking violation. And yeah, some municipalities just had a broader spread in terms of, parking in front of a fire hydrant is much more verboten than overstaying a 2-hour spot is different areas. That's the main distinction.
Okay.
Yeah, I don't recall any sort of time of year differences in terms of the fines or anything in that regard. And then I apologize. The first part
was just about like warning. Your first fine's a warning. Your second time you have a parking violation, you're going to get a fatter fine.
Yeah. I'm not sure. We'd have to look into if that is actually part of policy in those other jurisdictions that you mentioned.
Yeah.
I'm not aware of how they kind of incorporate that.
Okay.
Through the chair, I would say that how administratively complex do you want to make something like ticketing parking? And, you know, I think speaking from very, very recent experience, we do receive a discount, or one does receive a discount on a parking ticket if paid within a certain period of time.
Right.
So that's one way of dealing with it. But to say that we put a warning on somebody's ticket as a sort of an impetus to change behavior, I'd kind of maybe challenge that.
Right. Well, I mean, we're working on a license plate system everywhere now, right? So we're reading plates and tracking and monitoring. Yeah, so I'd be curious about the residential, you know, if people had a residential pass, rather than having to take a fine and then challenge it, that they pay for a monthly pass to have the privilege of on-street parking that's more than the 2-hour limit or the 3-hour limit.
Mayor Croak.
Thank you very much, Chair. I just want to try and understand the numbers in attachment A. So I understand from the note that operating revenues collected, operating expenses, parking fines, administration expenses are allocated based on the number of parking spots, right? And then we've got parking enforcement. There's no revenue collected as it shows. It shows operating expenses. So what are the parking enforcement operating expenses? What are they?
Sorry, which slide?
Attachment A, it's the last category on the right-hand side.
Oh, I see.
Do we know what those are? I'm just curious.
I would have to follow up with finance. Yeah, they've kind of provided this breakdown. But,
I suspect the operating expenses are largely for bylaw enforcement.
Well, and that's what one of the things I'm getting at. I mean, you hear the criticism, you know, well, most recently we've had criticism from one individual that we, you know, are just viciously fining people for parking at Westwood Lake, and another lengthy email complaining that we don't enforce the damn parking regulations, et cetera. So I'm probably satisfied that we're spending more than $111,000 a year on enforcement, and we don't break down, or do we break down anywhere when it comes to revenues collected, the fines? In other words, do we have some category that explains we're getting $200,000 a year in fines from parkades and $50,000 from street parking or whatever? I'm just curious to know, because that is the standard criticism. Oh, the city's out there, you know, fining us, trying to, it's a revenue source, et cetera, and I'd like to be able to provide some kind of an answer at some point.
Yeah, I'll have to follow up there. Sure.
Thank you. As long as I'm clear as what I'm getting at. I mean, as I say, it just shows operating expenses, shows revenue collected, contribution to reserve, but it doesn't tell me, or even if that information is available, what we're actually paying to collect those fines, or actually what the fines are in total.
So we'll certainly follow up and get back to the committee with that information.
Thank you.
Councillor Perino.
Thank you, Chair. Just a couple of questions. There are two options available to us. The one is basically saying, go ahead and figure out what we need to change and bring those changes to us. And the next one is basically, don't do anything. What we're already doing is fine. My question, two questions is, the machinery that we currently have today, would we be able to say, okay, so from this time to this time it's one price, and from that time to that time it's a different price? Is that easy enough to do with the current machinery? Do we have to upgrade our systems, in other words, to put in the increases?
To my understanding, so I can confirm with Mr. Rose on that one.
Okay.
But where we've implemented the app-based Honk Mobile, it would be quite straightforward to be able to do that.
Okay.
Anywhere that it's based on, we still have the physical meters.
Yes.
I'm not perfectly familiar with that. So we would look into that and see, you know, if we were proposing something, then we'd definitely incorporate any sort of upgrades as a cost associated. And considering that moving forward if we wanted to pursue
Okay.
change.
Okay, and then the other thing too is that our staff are already swamped. So I'm always conscious about giving extra work. Is there a lot of more staff time required to make these changes?
I think the goal would be to incorporate it into the existing parking project as much as possible. We're already in the report. There's discussion about the curbside management, which this fits a lot into.
Okay.
So, yeah, we've done some of kind of the legwork to get a bit of the lay of the land. I don't know that it would be a huge additional effort to kind of put some recommendations together for how we could continue, or just what those tweaks that we think would best help us would
It's not,
actually be.
but it's not just recommendations, it would then be the physical work to make the changes.
Right, yeah.
Right.
Do you mean like operationally moving forward, or?
Operationally.
It would depend, yeah, it would depend on the recommendations that came down. I think for a lot of them, in terms of some of those tweaks on the pricing, I don't think it would wildly change kind of the enforcement efforts and staff. But yeah, we'd have to look.
Okay. I'm just thinking that given there's some areas that we still need some answers to, maybe Mr. Sims, should we be making a decision at this time, or should we be deferring this? And I'm asking the question because I realize you're looking for some answers, but maybe we should be deferring it until we have the answers to the questions.
Through the chair, I think we're comfortable with proceeding as with the recommendation. It's just the gap in our understanding what those expenses are is really the issue. The other thing that I would add is part of the work here is to help streamline our very cumbersome bylaw 5000 and provide some better, more consistent enforcement, more consistent signage, more consistent regulation around parking across the entire city, rather than a variance all over the place, which probably creates inefficiency in all of our
That's
our
right.
work. Yeah.
Okay, so by moving the recommendation, that's not option 1 or 2, is it the same as option 1? The recommendation that the Governance and Priorities Committee recommend council direct staff to update existing public
That is
vehicle parking? That's the one? I'll move that one then. What I'm saying is the recommendation that's on the staff report, is that option basically option 1? Okay, I'll move that.
And seconded by Mayor Krog. Did you wish to speak further to it?
No, well, thank you for asking. I hate putting increases in, but I realize for the inconsistencies, that's an important piece, that we're consistent across the city, and I realize that we need to be doing this on a regular basis. What I hate are the big leaps, and I don't want to ever see that. I'd much rather a gradual incline versus the massive upgrade, because then that's really tough to manage. And we need to have some aspect of putting money in so that later on it'll help us with the costs. So I'm willing to support this.
Councillor Emmons?
Thank you, Chair. Just for my own understanding, so this will come back to us? Great, thank you.
So, Chair, just to reinforce the October 23rd GPC that Ms. Vicar went over, the agenda review would be the time when Mr. Casey comes back with all of the detailed recommendations that then would go into updates to the bylaw.
Thank you, and just speaking for myself, I'm not in favor of increasing rates at this time. I do think Councillor Manley raised a really important point about the increasing requests for resident exempt parking, and I think that is something that we really should be addressing. And I don't think just simply changing parking rates is going to address that at all. I definitely don't want to compare to VIU parking rates because they're astronomical and don't factor into what I'm comfortable with the city charging. And I note that the recommendation flags that this will affect lower income people, and I just don't think it's necessarily an appropriate time to be doing that. Mr. Sims, you want to weigh in there?
I apologize, Chair. I don't mean to enter into the debate. It's just that this isn't necessarily a rate increase. This is providing the financial picture as it stands today and looking to see if there's a compelling case for adjustment. So it's not necessarily, gee, we're losing money at parking, we need to jack our rates up. That's not the problem statement that we're looking at here. It's just, how can we streamline regulation? How can, you know, on the surface of it, the report would indicate that we're pretty good with our rates as far as, you know, other municipalities. Maybe we need to expand, as an example, maybe we need to expand the area of paid parking back to what it used to be in the downtown, you know, that it isn't anymore. And maybe we need to look at, you know, how do we handle resident exempt areas, which is challenging, of course, but so, sorry, I do apologize.
No, I appreciate you helping shift the lens through which I'm viewing this report. That is helpful. And as Councillor Hemmons mentioned, we'll have a like this will come back to us. And I just note that the piece around there being an existing program for resident exempt parking and sort of, you know, for lack of a better word, grandfathered in, and the potential to expand that, I am quite interested in that. Councillor Hemmons?
Thank you. I gapped. I want to make sure that we are going to talk about resident exempt parking. Will that be included in the next phase? I apologize that I missed that. It is the thing that we hear the most about.
I think we definitely could. I mean, I honestly think could be part of the existing project that we already have, that like the rates we're kind of appending that to, because we talk about that curbside management piece, which would be what is the kind of regulatory framework that we're using for all curbside parking. So yeah, that's already kind of part of the scope, but this is very helpful to hear.
Thank you.
Okay, all in favor? Motion carries unanimously. Thank you very much, and I will, unless there's any questions, which there are not, a motion to adjourn by Councillor Hemmons, seconded by Mayor Krogh. All in favor? Thank you everyone for your attendance today.